Okay, thanks. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Bike Committee ACH 20 in-person meeting at TRB 2022. We're so glad you're here. I'm joining you from Portland, Oregon, where I'm in my basement, trying not to wake up my family. I see that a lot of you are logging in from around the world, which is great. I'm so glad that you could join us. And for those of you that are here in person or with Peter in person, thanks for being there. And big thanks to Peter Kuntz for being willing to preside in person while I had to change my plans and stay home. Also joined on the line by Bahar Dadashova, our new committee secretary, and then you'll see Tom Schwartz name. Tom is graciously allowing us to use his phone to get better audio in the room. So we have a full program for you today. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. We have a pretty robust program for you today. We have intentionally tried to keep the meeting a little bit shorter because we want to reduce exposure for folks who are there while at the same time providing a full experience. So the first thing we want to do is just typical of TRB meetings. We want to go around and do introductions. If folks on the WebEx will just put your name and your affiliation in the chat, that would be great. And people around the room, we'll start off with Peter, and then Peter, if you can direct around the room for just saying your name and your affiliation. We'd love to hear who all is at the meeting today.
All right, I guess this is my part. So welcome. I am Peter Kuntz from Portland, Oregon. As Rebecca said, pitching in for this very interesting time we're living in. I guess with the microphone situation, so Tom has going to graciously offer his phone for the podium, so we'll hear speakers at the podium. The laptop also has a microphone, but that means that it's hard to hear you and the audience for the people that are on WebEx. So I think for introductions, we'll probably just go around the room, and that part won't be so great for people online, but at least we'll all know who's in the room. Okay? I was thinking. Okay. Let's not kind of go around. Let's just go with in the room introductions. That's what TRB is suggesting is to complete this sort of activity. I don't want to or so Peter Kuntz, Portland.
Charles Brown, Equitable State University. My own time on
Try to speak up. It's a little bit hard to hear, of course. Great. Rebecca, We're through the
Yes.
introduction.
Oh, excellent. So those of us on the line couldn't really hear much. Can you give us an idea, Peter, of how many people are in the room?
Say it's 40 people, 45 people, and they look
Oh, great.
amazing.
Okay,
Nobody
excellent.
has fallen asleep yet.
I'm so glad. I think I might be one of the people at biggest risk for that. Okay, so we're working on the WebEx for checking on some things. So everyone in the room, thank you again for being there in person. There is a virtual sign-in sheet. I'm not sure the best way to get it to you at this time. I've been putting it, it is in the chat for those online. What we might do is follow up with you after the meeting since Krista has your name, to have you sign in virtually that way, if that's okay. Or Peter, maybe you and I can brainstorm during the break about a better way to do that. I will also, I'll figure out something to where if people can look at my Twitter account, perhaps we can just have something there. I just want to give, maybe Peter, if you could put, I don't know if what people can see on the screen. Can people see any of the today's PowerPoint?
Sorry, say that again. You broke up just a little bit at the last minute.
I'm sorry, can people see the PowerPoint on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so we're on the agenda, and so I'm just going to give you a super brief rundown of what today's meeting is going to look like. So we just got through introductions, which is excellent. We had 20 minutes for those, so this is going to give us a little bit of time. We're going to go into a little bit of an overview of what we're doing today versus what we'll do at a virtual meeting in February. We'll have a couple of updates from other folks, including about our book club, the official TRB update, and partners. Want to give a little bit of feedback and food for thought about paper review, more updates coming about research, etc. And then we will go into a part of the presentation where we're actually going to hear from some of the best papers of this year. This is not all of the best papers of this year, but these papers were not in the lecture session, and we wanted to give them a little bit more airtime. And then we have a special panel in the second half of the meeting on increasing equity in bicycling, and we're really excited about that. Our aim is to get you out earlier so that we're reducing exposure. We also will have a 20-minute break or so. Peter will kind of make the last call about how long that actually is, but we thought, giving you time to go up and get some air, maybe get a coffee, that kind of thing. So we are really looking forward to today. So with no further ado, Peter, you want to go to the next slide, and then I think you'll need to go to one after that. Yeah, one more slide, Peter. Okay, so just a little bit of a brief update about what is left in TRB and for TRB folks in person. Today is Tuesday already. I can't believe it. And so you're here with us this morning at the Bicycle Transportation Committee. This afternoon, or rather this evening, there is potentially a subcommittee meeting on pedestrian bicycle safety analysis. I've not been able to confirm whether or not this is happening, and I apologize for that. Just haven't been able to reach the person in charge. So let's assume that it is happening if you are interested in it, but please don't be surprised if it does not happen. If it does not happen, we will have a virtual meeting this spring that is specifically on pedestrian bicycle safety analysis. You may have also noticed that because our research co-chairs were unable to be there in person and I was unable to be there in person, we did cancel the in-person bicycle research subcommittee meeting, which would have taken place yesterday. However, we are definitely having that virtually this spring as well. Tomorrow morning, there's a poster session on recent research on bike share, e-scooters, and micromobility. So please go by there and see some of the latest research for those folks. And then there's a powered micromobility subcommittee, which is the subcommittee that you might expect covers things like e-scooters and mopeds and things like that. And that will be tomorrow from 10:30 to 12. And then Thursday, if you're still there, there is a really just an amazing workshop, I think, that will take place. I'm really sad to miss it. Do you count if you're not counted? An exploration of systemic bias and crash data systems. That workshop's led by the PED committee, but we're a co-sponsor, and it promises to be, I think, really thought-provoking and important for our future work. And then tonight, if you if it matters to you, the TRB Minority Student Fellows research presentations are taking place the second half of this meeting. However, since we're trying to get you out earlier, it would be great to go by and see what they have to offer. And that tiny URL link at the bottom is just a link to this same schedule online, so you can access that at another time. So any questions before I move on?
Yes, Darren.
Can you give him the phone, Peter? So we can't hear anything.
He's coming up to the front.
Great, thank you.
And Rebecca, with your audio, just remember to talk a little bit slower. Sometimes when you are going faster, I think it's a little bit harder to hear you in the room.
Okay.
I'm pretty. Regarding the pedestrian bicycle safety analysis subcommittee, I'm pretty sure that Derek Troyer is going to be taking the lead on that. So that subcommittee meeting should be taking place.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah, can you hear me? I think if you.
Did you hear that, Rebecca?
Yes, I did. So Darren, thank you for that clarification. That's excellent news. So everybody, the event in purple will be taking place tonight. So glad to hear it. And Peter, thanks for the nod about speaking more slowly. I haven't even had coffee, if you can believe it. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what are we covering today versus the virtual meeting on February 1st? So a little bit of background. It was very clear to me over a month ago that most of the committee members for this committee were not going to be attending TRB for personal reasons, business reasons, constraints, that kind of thing. So we knew that we needed to plan a virtual meeting. So that's been in the works. We will send out the information to our friends after this meeting is over, but I didn't want things to be confusing. So we're going to cover official business there. We did want to give an in-person experience to those attending. So as I said in the very beginning, TRB did not provide bandwidth support for a virtual meeting or, sort of operational support for this meeting. They are supporting our February 1st meeting. So if we have technical difficulties today, please do bear with us. This is an experiment, and a lot of committees and subcommittees have had to adapt on the fly. But the great thing is that we have amazing people who are helping us on both sides, and we are adapting. So the kind of thing that we will cover on February 1st includes, sort of what you're probably used to from a committee meeting, like paper review subcommittee updates, the research subcommittee, what's going on there, the progress they've made, what they're working on, our communications subcommittee. I'm really excited that we will be doing somewhat of a communications overhaul this year. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. We have a new equity subcommittee, which I'm also really excited about. We've been meeting and there's a lot of work left to be done there, of course. And then other updates that you might, typically see from a TRB meeting. We are gathering updates in a spreadsheet, and I'll make that link available as well to you in the chat on the WebEx. We'll also send it out to folks in the room. I think you have seen it because I've sent it out in a couple of emails, but we're trying to collate all the updates in one place so that we're not having, past TRB meetings where people stood up for hours on end giving updates. We want to try to contain that in a format that you can easily access after the meeting as well. So stay tuned for the calendar information via mytrb.org. If you are not signed up, please sign up. It's easy to be a friend. It's free. Please update your information if you have changed professions. If you have updates to add to that spreadsheet in the meantime, please do send them to nickfoster@kittleson.com. So it's nfoster@kittleson.com. And that kind of covers this slide. If there are no questions, Peter, we can go to the next slide.
Any questions?
Okay. So I am seeing I'm going to just pause for a minute. I'm seeing that there's some trouble accessing the slides in the WebEx. So try to do this on the fly. So just a minute. Actually, this is perfect timing. I'm going to turn it over to Krista Nordback to talk about the Bike Committee Book Club, and I'll work on the WebEx. Krista?
Okay, Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll have to talk really loud. Okay. So we remember last year when we were all remote and we had these great presentations on equity. So some of us got inspired and formed a little book club, and we have a total of 67 people on our list. 67, you can join. We chose 2 books this year to read. The first was Adonia Lugo's Bicycle Race, Transportation Culture and Resistance, an autobiography kind of looking at our field and its failures and opportunities to incorporate diversity. So we enjoyed that one. Had some good discussion. We had about 20 people on that one. And then we started in on Politics of Movement, Mobility Justice, the Politics of Movement in an Age of Extremes by Mimi Scheller. And that was a heavy book. So we needed some extra time. We took the rest of the year focusing on that one. And we learned some new terms, some theories, some ideas about mobility that we hadn't thought of before. And from the individual all the way to the planetary, that book kind of goes through everything. So we recommend it. And we capped off the discussion with a visit from the author. So that was in December. And most of our groups are like small, so like 6 people. So don't think you're going to be discussing with 67 people. It's going to be smaller groups. So it was a good year for us, and we're looking forward to a new year. So we're focusing still on equity and transportation. And oh, and I should mention we have a Google Doc and a Goodreads group, thanks to Mohammed Movedi. Thank you, Mohammed. And then our next book is Bike Lanes, or White Lanes, by Melody Hoffman and Stacy Phillips, and Alejandro Manga are going to be taking over the book club. Thank you, guys. Stacy, you want to say some words about the next year of book club?
But props for people in the room. Everybody about to clean right before the trip, so don't start on it. So our deal is I'll do logistics, and Alejandro will lead and moderate the discussion. So when people are in, when you get the link to sign in, there'll be a place if you haven't already joined the book club to do that. Hopefully people will wait until after the February 1st meeting, get everybody signed up that wants to get signed up, and then we'll set a date. But go ahead, if you want to join in order the book, and you can get started on it. Like I said, we took a little bit of extra time with that last one, so as we dig into this, if we think we need more meetings, we'll be comfortable.
All right. How was that for you online? Did you hear that okay, Rebecca?
I heard Krista better than I heard Stacy, but I could hear Stacy somewhat. So thank you, everybody. This is such an experiment. Was there something, I don't know if Stacy was further away from the microphone or if that's just masks, and that's just kind of where we are with this meeting.
I think speakers will have to just remember that the microphone, it's tough. The laptop microphone is away from the audience, so we'll just do the best we can.
Okay.
Am I coming through okay?
You're coming through great. So maybe, Peter, do you mind just giving what I'm seeing is that other people had the same experience. They didn't hear Stacy as well. Do you mind just giving a quick recap of what Stacy said?
Sure. Stacy's going to take care of the logistics for the next meeting. February 1st is that next virtual meeting of the committee. So the plan is to have bike lanes or white lanes as a follow-on to that. So if you haven't ordered the book, now is a good time to do that.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thank you, Peter. Super clear. Thank you, Stacy. All right. And you'll notice that we have indicate your interest in the sign-in form. Still trying to figure out the best way to get you all in the room, the link to that. But again, Peter and I will work on that in the break, and we'll make sure that you are covered in one way or another after that. So if there are no questions about the bike club, yeah, let's go on. So this is your official TRB update. So it's the 101st annual meeting of the Transportation Research Board. Congratulations to all of you for being there, and also to TRB for such a long career. That's a long time. A lot has changed, right? And we're at the precipice of a lot more change. So it's exciting to be part of this organization. If you don't know already, you can access the annual meeting program via the online program or by using the TRB 2022 app. And that information on the screen is for those present for usernames and password for Wi-Fi. In 2021, we peer reviewed more than 4,900 papers. It's a lot of work, a lot of scholarship. So well done. And thank you so much to all those who participated in that. We organized a combined 350 sessions and workshops. By we, I mean the TRB community, and held more than 300 committee meetings. So that's quite a bit of work to go into 2021, despite all of the turmoil and everything that people were facing personally and professionally. So well done, community. Additionally, transportation research record is climbing in the rankings. The impact factor of 1.56 has steadily increased since 2015, and hopefully it's going to just continue to increase as we smooth out all of the wrinkles and really continue with high quality scholarship. It has been the #1 transportation journal cited by policy sources, was from 2018 to 2020. So that's a great sign for the future of TRR. So next slide. News from the TRB Executive Office. The Executive Committee is commencing work early on the next issue of critical issues in transportation with a focus on 5 broader societal goals. So safety and security, public health, economic and societal vitality, climate change, and equity. So no small scope there. We are working on our part of this. We just got an email from some folks at TRB a couple of days ago asking for our input in these areas. So we have obviously been working on some things as a full committee, but if you have expertise in any of these areas and want to help, please contact Bahar Dadashova, again, our new committee secretary, at tti.tameo.edu. Sorry, I butchered that a little bit. Apologies also for some of the wordiness on some of these slides. However, we did want to make them available afterward, and so they are not as pithy as they might be. Additionally, TRB is embarking on a new strategic plan, and the goals for the plan include preparing to address current and future issues, so no small goal there, expanding TRB's impact, and then assuring continued creativity, resilience, and sustainability. And I think that last one is really important to me, and I'm sure to all of you, as we are sitting here, some of us calling in from across the world, some of us calling in from our basements in the United States, but just unable to travel. And that resilience also pertains to the entirety of our system, right? So I'm really appreciative of this focus and interested to see where this goes. And our committee will do our part to be as much of to have as much voice in this area as we can. Sustainability being another aspect of that, that's both related to the climate, but also to the fiscal sustainability of the organization. So looking forward to this. Next slide. TRB has also renewed its long partnership with several federal agencies. It's once again sponsored by the Office of Science and Technology and Research. I think that's right. I'm sorry, I don't have my notes right there for that. But the Federal Transit Administration, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Federal Railroad Administration, and Federal Aviation Administration. And the reason this matters is because we aren't a line item in the congressional budget, which is good, which is what TRB, that is how they want it. But that does mean then that we really do depend on these partnerships. And if you all know, the last 2 years have been hard on TRB. And so having this partnership actually provides us, again, with some of that fiscal sustainability and resilience that we need going forward as an organization. We're also undertaking an effort to understand equity, diversity, and inclusion as an organization. So if you're willing, please do update your profile in mytrb.org to provide your demographic information, because that will help us track the TRB's DEI performance, so diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. We currently have data for less than 50% of our committee members and less than 25% of our committee friends. So we really don't have a good handle on who we're reaching. And if we don't have that handle, as researchers, we don't actually know what we're missing, right? So it's important if you're willing to provide that information. And while you're at mytrb.org, please do make sure your email address is updated. Every time I send out one of those emails, I get probably 100, return to senders because people have moved on and haven't updated their profile, and we would love to stay in touch. Finally, as TRB continues its increase on equity, they've asked all of the chairs a key question, which is how are we addressing transportation-related equity issues in our committee? And so I've talked a little bit about that. We're going to talk, obviously, have an entire panel about how we can do better in that way at the end of this meeting. And then we'll talk more about it at the virtual meeting at February 1st. So, and if there are no questions, we can proceed. I'm also happy to take any questions.
Questions? Oh, come on, this is a quiet group. Let's go. Come on. How are we addressing equity? All right, I'll give you my example. So one of the things that I've been trying to do, I applaud Rebecca for putting that TRB minority student fellows on the agenda so that you know it's there. It's important to support students that are coming to TRB. So think about that as you leave this session. Hopefully don't leave right away. But that's a great example of how we can get and start working towards making sure that people are getting their message out there in terms of what they're doing for their research. So just give that some thought as you walk through the halls. All right, Rebecca, back to you.
Thank you, Peter. So next slide. This is, I think, the last one of our official update. So news from the Technical Activities Division includes that after 2 years after the strategic alignment, the Technical Activities Division is moving forward with an internal reorg of staff. So they welcomed a new TAD Deputy Director and a new Director of Operations. Hopefully that will strengthen again TRB's organizational capacity. And plan ahead, the next TRB annual meeting will be held January 8th through 12th, 2023. I have no additional information at that time, but I can commit to you that I will do all that I can to try to ensure that there are hybrid options next year. Being in this position here, but also feeling some consternation just even before this meeting about, the fact that we know that for years now, TRB has been inaccessible for various reasons to various folks. And so we had a brief glimpse of what that increased accessibility could look like last year. That wasn't a way at that time for TRB to be able to, fiscally responsibly carry that forward. But I know that there are a lot of other organizations who've been going through the same thing, and there's a lot we can learn. And so we're definitely committed to increasing access on our side as much as possible. So stay tuned for more about that as that planning unfolds. Next slide. Okay, so TCRP update. This is actually for Stefan. Is he in the room, Peter?
Yes, he is.
Okay, let me turn it over to him.
You want to, this is the microphone of choice because it also has the laptop. So for the online, if you project this way, I think it'll work.
All right, I'll keep this quite with time with the Transit Cooperative Research Program. I'm here to, you guys are already familiar with the cooperative programs, applied research programs. In the transit program, I'm here for two apps for you. Number one is I want you to be prepared to engage. We have watch out for the request for proposals that will be out next quarter on our National Cooperative Highway Research Program, Project 7-31. The final title isn't out yet, but it's going to be looking at non-fatal pedestrian and bicycle injury data. And we're also particularly looking to make sure we assess what are the gaps and needs for research. The large project is a real opportunity to get at a lot of these things you talk about in strategic plan. The other ask is right now, we're looking for people to serve on the technical panel that will work on the next edition of the Transit Capacity and Quality of Service Manual. I see Paul Rias is in the audience. This is the one thing I wrote to your chair that I wanted to make a pitch for. Make sure you nominate people or yourself to serve on that panel to make sure that all the interfaces and all the metrics really drive decision making in the transit world include bicycle considerations. I'm gonna leave with you with the project here. This is all either in the slide or on the link there. And my card, if you have any follow-up questions. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Paul, you want to raise your hand so people know, talk to you? You're the Transportation Quality Service man. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Rebecca, back to you.
All right. We will send out notes after this and make sure that Stefan's email information is included in those notes. So next slide. Okay, tips for paper review. So while we don't have we're not going to have the full paper review update today. We'll have that on February 1st. I did want to give those of you in the room and those of you online just some tips that we kind of realized we needed to give through this year's process. So as a reminder, paper review is expected of members. That's part of your duty, and it's really appreciated by friends. We could not do it without our volunteers. Well, we're all volunteers. Who am I kidding? But without our friends. So thank you so much for those of you who have participated in the past. And I encourage any of you who are in the room to participate in the future. It is a great way to show service to the committee and a great way to beef up your quals for when you want to apply to the committee. An important thing to remember about paper review is that qualitative feedback is expected, not just rankings. So for example, this year we had a couple of reviews where the person said something along the lines of, I agree, and that was their feedback. And that's actually not helpful for the authors. It is also not really helpful for the paper review coordinators, because if there's any kind of disagreement between the rankings, or, we need to make any decisions about, hey, should this paper be considered for a top paper, we need more feedback from you about that. That said, if a paper is assigned to you and it's not in your area of expertise, you can always decline. We don't want you to feel like you have to review a paper that you don't know anything about. Also, if you're overloaded, you can decline. Other than committee members, that has to be something we negotiate. Filling out paper review surveys that come out from either the chair or the paper review co-chairs is a great way to help the coordinators direct the papers to you, so that you don't get something you're not interested in or in which you don't have any expertise. So that's sort of the background. When you review, please lead with the positive. I think we all know that it feels much better to hear constructive criticism after we've heard someone open up with, I really appreciated this part of what you did, or I really liked this, or that kind of thing. Please be kind and productive. So the kindness goes with the positivity. But really your job as a paper reviewer is to help people. Like, these are articles that may end up being published in a journal. And so we want those to serve us as professionals. But even if they aren't published as a journal, they're often student work, or their work from someone who might be, we don't know if it's a new topic for them or where they are in their career. And so it's on all of us as a, part of being humankind to be productive in those responses. And then the next and related thing is to be specific, if possible, in your suggestions. So something like your paper is repetitive is really not helpful, because the person might receive it and think, I don't know where I should make improvements. Obviously, I wrote it, so I didn't think it was as repetitive, but you do. So that kind of really broad statement is not super helpful. Something that would be more helpful would be a comment such as, consider combining paragraphs 1 and 2 on page 4, as they seem somewhat repetitive. So those are just examples. I'm sure I've done the gamut of paper reviews, but I hopefully have learned over time how to be more helpful, particularly when I receive unhelpful feedback for myself. So think about, when you are writing your comments, is this something that would help me if I were on the other side of this? For more information, we do have a link to a great article from the University of Illinois about, again, how to be more specific. It's really long and specific, so read that if you want. Otherwise, just keep what I've said in mind, and I think we'll have a great paper review process next year. And Carrie, if you want to drop any wisdom in the chat, that's great. Otherwise, we'll save more of that for the virtual meeting. Any questions for that? If not, we can move on.
I'm not seeing any. This group is kind of quiet.
Okay, it is early. All right, next slide.
It's not as early as it is for you. Rebecca,
This is
everybody
true.
should know that Rebecca is up at 5 in the morning for this meeting. So if you thought it was hard to get here, let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you, Peter.
I think if the shoe was on the other foot, I would not be up at my computer at 5 in the morning.
Oh, thank you, everybody. All right, so we have some selected partner updates. Again, we are actually saving more of this for the spreadsheet and then some of them again for the virtual meeting, but we have a couple in person. So if Jeremy is there, we can do the update on Sharp 2 data.
Jeremy is here. He's walking
Excellent.
up. Let's see.
So, I'm Jeremy Sudwig from Virginia Tech. We are a contractor for Federal Highway hosting the Sharp 2 NDS data set. It's in phase 2, so it's in a phase of kind of maintenance. We're not adding to the data set per se, but providing accessibility to it. Federal Highway, in kind of studying use of the data set, found that there were still many researchers that were not aware of the data set, or there's some barriers to making use of the data set. In particular, kind of not knowing how to get to it or understanding that there were free elements available. And so I just asked for a little bit of time. We spoke with Bernardo, and he agreed that we could come speak to this committee. So,
Jeremy,
yeah.
we do have your slides. Peter,
Oh.
if you advance to the next slide, we've got Jeremy's slides.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mhm.
So to give a little bit of background about Sharp 2, there are 3,500 drivers in the study. We instrumented the vehicles with five channels of video, IMUs, and just different instrumentation. So we have about 32 million miles of continuous driving collected. And so I think where this could be of particular interest, there are several cases that we've identified of vehicle interactions with pedal cyclists. In some of the crashes or near crashes that we have observed, there's been some conflict between the various modalities. This data set also has a companion data set developed by Iowa State University called the Roadway Information Data Set, which could be combined with it to kind of get a textual understanding of where drivers are, what's happening. Within this data set, we have that time series data collected from the vehicle. We have participant assessments, there's about a dozen or so surveys the participants completed on entry into the study. We have the event data where we had manual review and annotation of the event. Cell phone records, some participants provided their cell phone records. Each participant in the study for about a year. So we have about a year up to 2 years of driving. Anytime key on, key off for the vehicle. So there are several initial data requesters who have agreed to make their data sets available for free for secondary use. So we have to operate on a cost recovery basis, which has been a barrier to use, but there are a lot of data sets now that are available for free that contain really great elements of the Sharp 2 data set. So kind of the pitch is, if you have any interest in Sharp 2, reach out. If we go to the next slide, there's the Insight website. So the Insight, if you just search on Insight, Sharp 2, it'll bring you to this point. You can see some of the sample data here. Reach out and contact us if you're interested. There's a citation repository in here where you can see the existing data sets that are available for free. We do have to use the data use license, so there's no cost for that. So, just wanted to bring this to your attention. If you have any interest, there's no cost to it, so reach out.
Thank you. Great, Jeremy.
Peter, there's a question in the chat online. Are the 6.9 thousand near crashes involving e-bikes, or are they only with vehicles?
They're a combination.
Okay. Thank you, Jeremy. And Peter Olms is helpfully adding a resource in the chat as well. Other questions in person? Like, we're ready to move on?
I think we're ready.
Okay, I want to take a moment. Is either Chris Cherry or John MacArthur in the room?
Yeah, looks like Chris is coming this way.
Excellent.
Yeah, so Chris Cherry, I've been working with John MacArthur at Portland State for the last few years on this powered micromobility subcommittee. It's a joint subcommittee out of this committee, pedestrians, AP 020, or what used to be that, I think, is the innovative transit, which is the shared side of micromobility essentially, and law enforcement are the four committees that sponsor that. This is the mothership, the host committee, bicycling. So we're meeting tomorrow. I think that was mentioned as an announcement early on, and next door 101. So if you're interested in micromobility, meaning electric bikes, scooters, maybe even mopeds, parcel delivery, freight, e-trikes, etc., all the way to other vehicles like powered skateboards and the like, please come by. This is kind of a pivotal moment for our committee, I believe, our subcommittee, as we're trying to kind of identify the direction of the group as we move forward in this new era. What used to be the Powered Micromobility Committee focused for the last 10 or so years on e-bikes and other modes like that. And so with scooters and kind of mainstreaming of shared micromobility, our committee has had a lot more action, let's say, okay? You'll find a lot of micromobility papers throughout the program. We have a list by the time you see it tomorrow. All the sessions mostly will be over, but if you need that, we can share it with you. Yeah, so show up. We're looking for activity. We're looking for friends and volunteers to help as we map our next triennial plan, for example, and so on. And we're also going to have some quick highlights of some of the research that's going on, a lot of national level cooperative research, NHTSA, National Science Foundation, and so on, that's going on in the micromobility world now. So there's a lot of fun things going on. If you're interested in anything micromobility, meaning scooters, e-bikes, and the like, please come on over. Okay.
Chris?
Thank you, Chris. Okay. If there are no questions, and I don't see any in the chat, we'll move on. So one of the things that we will do again at the virtual meeting, but wanted to give a little preview of today, is some of the findings from NCHRP research that our committee has contributed to. And so we helped foster the statements and get these things funded, and that's really exciting. It's really, actually so thrilling to see your work come to fruition. And NCHRP 1573 is one of those projects. This project is being led by Tool Design. It also involves Portland State University, Oregon State University, and Safe Streets Research and Consulting, which is my firm. And so I'm going to give a little brief overview of what we're doing. We're still smack in the middle of the project with a lot left to do, but wanted to let you know where we are. So this is design options to reduce turning motor vehicle bicycle conflicts at controlled intersections. And the point of this project is really to address a need that is driven by the majority of current guidance, which focuses on design details, but not how to choose treatments. Oftentimes your bikeway selection guidance focuses on mid-block characteristics, and practitioners struggle to select treatments at intersections. So we need information on expected differences and safety performance of treatments in order to provide that better and more helpful guidance for bicycle treatment selection at intersections. Next slide. So this project has 3 phases. Phase 1A, which is the state of the practice phase that was completed this April. Phase 1B is the safety analysis. This is an ongoing phase, and we expect it to go through next summer of 2022. So this summer, I guess. And then phase 2 is guidance development, and that will start in 2023. So we're right now in phase 1B, the safety analysis, and we're using a 3-pronged approach, including crash analysis. So we've carefully selected sites, and we're trying to make sure we have sufficient samples to be able to detect differences between treatments at various sites. We also will be conducting some conflict analysis to examine near misses at a subset of our sites. And then we are also doing a human factor study led by David Hurwitz at Oregon State to explore the performance of newer designs, and that with a particular focus on visibility. So this, our timeline has been adjusted, as you might expect, due to COVID-19. And so we had anticipated having this data collection all done by now, but we're very hopeful that we will be able to get out and do the field data collection that we need this spring so that we can finish the safety analysis by this summer. Next slide. So what we've done, well, we have produced a state of the practice technical memorandum that we used to define the research needs and the project focus areas. And that included a summary of design guidance, a literature review, and then also interviews with practitioners. We also produced a site selection technical memo that identified candidate sites for crash analysis and conflict analysis and site selection criteria. Next slide. And right now we are working through the crash analysis and the conflict analysis. We're doing this at a couple of levels. One is a state level crash analysis that's using descriptive statistics to draw broad conclusions regarding the type, frequency, and severity of these bicycle crashes at controlled intersections. So we're looking at 3 states right now: Texas, Minnesota, and California. We're also doing data consolidation for each of the selected cities for a micro crash analysis and conflict analysis. And that micro crash analysis is really where we'll be able to dig in and pull in a lot more of the built environment data to try to bring nuance to those state level crash findings. And then as we're finalizing intersection selection for the micro crash analysis, we will also then choose the subset of places where we'll do the conflict analysis. I should say that this project is being led by Christina Fink at Tool Design, and Portland State University is helping with both, building the data set for the micro crash analysis, but also they'll be leading the conflict analysis, and that's led by Chris Monsieur. And then, as I mentioned, David Hurwitz is leading the human factors study, and right now they're working through the experimental design and they're generating the models for the simulator. So we're really hopeful that we have more concrete findings to share with you next year, but that's where we are, and we appreciate, again, the support of the committee in helping get this project moving and funded. And so with that, we can turn it over to Bahar for an update about NCHRP 1574. Oh, I'm sorry, one more slide for me. Tina, these are Tina's slides, but she couldn't be here. So I'll just briefly say what's next. The crash analysis and the conflict analysis. We are working toward a complete statistical analysis for the micro crash analysis using more detailed intersection attributes, field data collection for the video for the conflict analysis, and the counts for exposure in one city. We have actually, very fortunately, we have exposure models for several of our cities, but we would need to create one for or exposure data for the 4th city. And then for the human factor study, the next steps are to test and actually run the experiment in the simulator. And finally, when we pull it all together, the design guidance will use findings from the safety analysis to generate a decision tool for selecting intersection treatments based on risk factors, in particular volume and speed, and then also provide updated detailed design guidance for intersection treatments, including visibility and sight distance at intersections. So I can take a pause and ask if there are any questions. Otherwise, if not, we can move forward.
Yeah, a couple of questions from the audience.
Okay.
You actually have to come up here because she's gonna need to hear it. Come on up.
So thank you very much, Rebecca, for the great presentation. My question about this NCHRP work is that have you gone through instrumentizing your bicycles to see the interactions between the users and the geometry, or the also the safety issues that could encounter with a real moving micromobility device?
Yeah, great question. Thank you so much. Can you tell us your name?
Yes, my name is Martez Hossein Sabagian. I'm from the University of Mississippi.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. It's hard to know who people are with the masks on. So great questions. The answers are that what you've suggested is unfortunately beyond the scope of this project. Bicycle instrumentation would be so interesting to examine in comparison to various types of treatments in various scenarios, but that's not what we have in our project. That's not within the scope of this project. In addition, we aren't treating micro-mobility, e-scooters in particular, at all in this project. This is specifically focused on bicycling. But I welcome you to participate in the research needs development process, because we do, there's a lot of room for additional research in this area, for sure. Thank you for your question. Peter, anybody else?
Hi, this is Aaron Greenwood with the NHTSA Office of Crash Avoidance. We have a document, about 2007, the pre-crash scenarios, that's guided a lot of the research for light vehicle crash avoidance technology. Will the microanalysis be able to help us generate something like that that could lead to crash avoidance technology in vehicles addressing these bicycle conflicts?
That's a great question. Aaron, I'm so glad you're there, because one of the things that we've been struggling with is the lack of uniformity between crash data sets. And that's something that actually I think is a very serious need. It's something that we'll discuss on Thursday as well in the workshop. But it's really hard to actually build a data set that compares, you can do it at a state level in some states, but quite frankly, some of the states we've examined don't even record an action for the bicyclist. So, while they do record an action for the driver, they don't always record it in a way that allows us to even develop crash types. So the answer, in short, is probably not as comprehensively as you would like. I would hope that we would be able to provide some information in that area, but we would really appreciate NHTSA's support very broadly, well beyond this project, in working, helping us and helping jurisdictions get to a place where we have this uniformity, at least, with some sort of key characteristics that would allow us to do those broader comparisons. As it is, I mentioned that we were using 3 states for the macro crash analysis. And the reason we're using those 3 states is that, quite frankly, we couldn't do more because, again, of these data issues. It's actually so much work to go in when you're trying to pull together disparate data sources that we used a tremendous amount of budget on that, in a way that I think we could have avoided if we had more uniformity across state crash data sets. So would love to talk with you more about this. As you can tell, I have some passion about it. And if you can maybe shoot me an email afterward, we can also talk more specifically about how our data might be able to support the guidance that you were mentioning.
Absolutely. Thank you for your answer, and I'll be in touch. Thank you.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you so much.
All right, Rebecca, thank you so much for that update. It's a very exciting project.
Thank you, Peter. I see, Peter, before we move on, I see there's one question in the chat. Great question. Darren Buck's asking us, will there be a component that measures user safety perception of the different treatments? So Darren, I think you know me well enough to know that that's something I feel really strongly about. In this project, we are not able to do that via any survey or anything like that. What we are doing is looking at the near misses, and we'll try to do some triangulation there. But certainly there have been several research needs statements that we've written and for this committee and in partnership with other committees to try to get this safety perception aspect to be better studied. And we're still waiting on NCHRP 0731 to come out to see whether or not perceptions of safety are included in that scope. If not, you can bet that we'll be back at it to try to make sure that at some point we actually get funding to look at that. And I do want to acknowledge that Carrie Watkins was on the line. She may still be on the line. Her research that looked at how perceptions of bicycle facilities changed in the South did get to this a little bit. So Carrie, if you want to put anything in the chat, that would be great. Otherwise, just want to acknowledge that we can't do that in this project, but it's certainly something that our committee supports investigating further in the future. I think, Peter, we can actually move on for real this time. Bahar?
Yeah, sure. So I think I'm going to skip some of the slides, but I will try to keep it short. So next slide, Peter. So we're doing this research with together with Portland State University Tool Design and Safe Streets. And as I put there, this is a limited use document, so we'll need the permission from NCHRP to distribute anything. Next slide. So there were 815 bicyclist crashes from 2014 to 2018, and these crashes have been increasing. I think in 2019, they increased from 66.3% from 2017 to 2018, and a study by that I mentioned here. Sorry, my screen is very small now. So the study by NHTSA found that 59% of fatalities, bicyclist fatalities, actually occur on at mid blocks. Although more injury crashes, a lot more crashes occur at intersections, but most of the fatalities occur at mid block segments. So many states or cities are using separated on-street bike facilities to help to overcome this safety issue, but there is no guidance on how to develop data-driven, how to implement and select these designs based on data-driven methods. Next slide, please. So therefore, the objective of this project was to develop data-driven guidelines for selecting context-appropriate bicycle facility design features for safety improvement of existing designs and for planning new facilities. So the guidance that will be developed in this project will serve two purposes. And it will be based on up-to-date quantitative analysis of crash patterns and safety evaluation of contextual factors associated with bicyclist crash conflict and safety risks at mid-blocks. Next slide. I think you can move on to the next slide, Peter. Just want to keep it short. So this project also has three phases. In the first phase of this project, we conducted literature review, developed criteria for selecting mid-block sites, and identified potential cities with mid-block sites for including in analysis. In the second phase of this project, which is ongoing right now, we're collecting and compiling data for selected sites, and we're going to submit the interim report. The idea is to submit the interim report by April, but we may have to extend it a little because of the reasons that Rebecca mentioned that they had in NCHRP 1573. And in phase 3 of this project, we will conduct safety analysis and develop and submit draft final deliverables. So the deliverable will include a tech memo and guidelines, as well as tech transfer documents. Next slide, please. Yeah, here we have included the progress on this project. As you can see, we plan to finalize the project in August of next year, of 2023. Next slide, please. So in the first phase of this project, we encountered many challenges, and we have really great team of researchers, and we spent a lot of time just discussing what were the main challenges and how to address them in the context of this project. Of course, understanding how different types of contextual factors relate to safety performance of bike facilities was was one challenging task because there is really no guidance on this. So we had to spend some time, reviewing literature, and not just the published one, but also unpublished. So as you may know, the bicycle literature safety, there are a lot of interesting papers, but they haven't been published yet. And we also spent some substantial, considerable time selecting the appropriate bike facility design. I mean, we found that a lot of the practical guidance on selection of appropriate bike facility designs are based on convenience and not on data-driven methods. So that creates one challenge. Of course, conducting data-driven methods is a very challenging task itself on its own because of the lack of data, such as bike exposure, safety measures, as well as bicycle infrastructure characteristics. So these three factors mentioned here make it a lot more difficult. Bicycle safety studies as compared to the vehicle safety studies, because for example, a lot of the crash reports are designed based on the vehicle crashes. And we also have a lot of missing data on bicycle infrastructure. So as I said, we spent considerable time trying to address these challenges. So we developed a roadmap to set a criteria. In the phase 1 of the project, we developed a roadmap to set the criteria for selecting mid-block sites. We had to select both the facility designs that we want to include. So as I said, the facility designs, when we say facility design, we mean both implementing new designs and then upgrading the existing ones. So we think that the safety analysis should be conducted for both types of designs. And then, as I said, we also spent a lot of time trying to identify the contextual factors. And this was actually based on rigorous literature review of both published peer-reviewed literature and then some guidelines. So our roadmap was also set. We also looked at the data availability and developed the study design based on the data availability. So in this table, just showing how we selected the potential sites for safety evaluation. So this project is a little different from 1573 because of the designs that we are looking at. They're a lot more common and they have been implemented in many cities. So we should, theoretically speaking, we should have a lot of sites for studying, but that might not be the case. So that's why we try to look at, kind of divided our site selection into 2 steps. In the first one, we decided to look at existing open source databases, data sources from cities and states, and develop the data inventory based on the open source data. At the same time, we also conducted a survey that was distributed to the cities. This was conducted by Portland State University, where we asked about the availability of bike facility, bike count, and other types of data such as land use, access, and roadway design. We also asked about the availability of crash data, of course. For now, that's the only safety measure we're planning to use in this project. So we don't plan on doing conflict analysis like the 1573. And then we combined all this available information together in order to select the cities where we want to include in our analysis. Next slide, please. So here I provide the map of cities that were selected. So in the right now, in the second phase of this project, we're trying to collect the data from the cities. We have already found it seems that they have really good bike inventory data, although putting them together is going to be challenging. Again, that uniformity issue that Rebecca mentioned. They also have some limited count data, and most of it are short-term counts. So this kind of created another question, whether there's a need to develop any direct demand models or scaling factors so that we can estimate the counts for sites that we don't have the count data. Also in this phase, we're also going to look at, try to collect additional data on contextual factors. So those are ongoing, and we're also reaching out to the cities to gather additional data. And after this phase is finished, and for the rest of the 2022, we plan on conducting preliminary safety assessment, and the guidelines hopefully will be developed after that. And next slide. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me or Anne Hartel, who is the project manager of this project.
Hey, Bahar, it's Tom Schwert. I hope you're doing well.
Hi, Tom.
Hey, so was there any consideration, or could there be consideration of including cities, maybe European cities that have a more developed cycling culture than we tend to here? That would give kind of a wider range to me.
Yeah, I think we didn't want to create that bias, but I think most of the cities we selected ended up that way because the cities that have a better bicycling culture also turn to have better count data and infrastructure data. So we sort of selected the cities based on data availability, but we really didn't look at if they are like, what is the, for example, what's the ranking, what's their ranking in terms of being bicycle friendly. But I am assuming most of them are that the ones that we selected in the end just turned out to be bicycle friendly cities.
Okay, anything online? Any comments coming through the chat? Right. Well, thank you, Bahar. That was very great. Looks like a lot of exciting research happening there.
Thank you, Bahar. Before we
Thank you.
jump into the, yeah, thank you. Before we jump into the best papers, I want to give Darren Torvik some time, and we're running a little bit behind on schedule. I think it's okay because we actually are trying to shorten the meeting overall, but Darren, if you could keep to about 5 minutes, that would be great.
Sure. I guess trying to get the slides up. Darren Torvik with TTI. Trying to give a present update on 1784. Given a few present updates on this project. There was some logistical issues and delays on the project as I was transitioning from MRI Global to TTI, but its project's been moving along recently, so it's been nice to get it moving. Just real brief, looking at the objectives and scope, develop pedestrian bicycle SPS for transportation practitioners at all levels to better inform planning, design, operation decisions. And in terms of the scope, develop SPS for both roadway segments and intersections and rural and urban areas. Really had 3 different work plans that we were working on. The first one was develop pedestrian bicycle SPS using available exposure data. So trying to work pedestrian bicycle exposure data into the crash prediction models. Work plan A. Work plan B was to develop and test an alternative approach to bicycle and pedestrian crash prediction based upon the road assessment program methodology. So there we really were trying to look to update or modify the US RAP, IRAP models for
better use and implementation into the highway safety manual. And then work plan C was to develop the probability of pedestrian and bicycle crashes based upon crash data, but in the absence of pedestrian and bicycle exposure data, volume data. So mainly going to focus on the models that have been developed out of work plan A, and then sort of touch on the schedule moving forward. So with work plan A, we focused on developing the crash-based models for roadway segments and intersections in urban areas. This is where your crash count or the count programs are being conducted for pedestrian and bicycle count data. So focused on the urban and suburban areas. We collected inventory data, volume data for Minneapolis, Philadelphia, and then we also developed direct demand models to take the count data and hit the locations and then be able to use it throughout the network. So we developed used negative binomial regression models. Here's typical forms for the regression models for segments and intersections. The models that we ended up developing based upon sample sizes for urban or for roadway segments, 2-lane, 4-lane roads, combined, divided, and undivided, and then one-way roads. We had facilities 1, 2, and 3 lanes for the one-way roads. For intersections, your 3-leg, 4-legs, stock controlled and signalized intersections. Didn't have as much data on the stock controlled, so in the modeling effort, we actually had to combine the 3-leg and 4-leg stock controlled into one model, trying to count for the number of legs. And then for signalized intersections, for the 4-leg signalized intersections, we had both 2-way versus 2-way intersections, and then 2-way versus 1-way intersections. In terms of the severity levels, we modeled all injuries. We looked at fatal and serious injury crashes, but really didn't have enough data to develop some good models out of that. So although we'll present the fatal and serious injury models in the report, don't anticipate that those would be included or recommended for use in the HSM. And then we also looked to develop exposure-only models, and then expanded models, which included some adjustment factors. And the adjustment factors that we have found for, and this is for roadway segments, the pedestrian models, the adjustment factors included the presence of a sidewalk buffer, number of sidewalks, lane width, presence of a median, the speed limit, presence of a bus stop, number of lanes for the one-way roads. And then for the bicycle models, the presence of a buffered bike lane, lane width, presence of a median, speed limit, and number of lanes again. They're not, all these adjustment factors aren't included in every model, but at least one or a few of the models. For those are for roadway segments. For intersections, for the stop controlled intersections, don't anticipate that there are going to be any adjustment factors. It's only going to be exposure only models looking to identify the adjustment factors for the signalized intersections. Moving forward in terms of what we recommend for HSM2, incorporate the exposure only models from work plan A into the network screening chapter in part B. For work plan, incorporate work plan B models, the US RAP models for the rural 2-lane and rural multi-lane, predictive chapters in part C, and then incorporate work plan the A and B models for urban suburban arterials into that chapter. Initially, whenever we made the recommendation, we had a panel meeting in December. We initially recommended that only include the US RAP methodology or the work plan B models for part C, but the panel wanted to include both models, both types of models into the urban suburban arterial chapter. And then work plan C models we recommend are included in the new pedestrian bicycle chapter, which is going to be in part A of HSM2. In terms of schedule, submit draft final project deliverables or in February, and then finish up with the final in May of 2020, May of this year. With that, any questions?
I think we're speechless, Darren. Really excited to see this come out, and thanks for all of your hard work over the years.
One question coming forward.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, so I was wondering if you can give us a bit more information about the RAP models, because I think the EuroRAP and IRAP models do not have crash prediction component, but this might be different for the US.
They do have a crash prediction component to them, so there are crash prediction components to the US RAP methodology, so they are incorporated into one. I guess I'm not going to say limitation, but using the US RAP methodology, there isn't an over dispersion parameter associated with the crash prediction methodology, so. Use of the the US RAP methodology is going to be restricted to a predictive method versus incorporating the empirical based methodology. We'll note that. All right, thank you.
Darren, one more question from Martin. Are all of the work plan models going to be in the final report in May?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Thanks so much.
It's always nice to be able to say yes to a question.
So thanks, everyone. Great job thus far. Peter, is Jennifer Dill in the room, or Stefanie Brodie, to give an update on 2123?
I don't see her.
Okay, she has a conflicting poster session, so we knew it would be wouldn't be a guarantee. So in that case, let's move on to our selected best of papers for 2022. Again, actually, we had a lot of great papers this year, and these are some of the papers. Yesterday, there was a lectern session. I hope you all were able to go to that. These are some of the papers that are being presented in poster sessions. And so we have collated everything into this PowerPoint. Peter's bringing that back up. And we will start with Ralph Buehler. So Ralph, if you want to come up to the computer, welcome you to start.
I don't. Oh, Ralph is here. Oh, good.
He's here. And all of the slides are able to be, you can go through the slides from here, Ralph. So these are all in Peter's current slide deck.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. In this study, we compared bicycling and bicycling policies in Washington, D.C. and Frankfurt in Germany. The two cities have about similar population size. Our centers of large, about 6 million people, urban regions have had strong population growth, 14% each over the last decade. Have tons of in-commuters from the outside, 400,000 in Frankfurt, 500,000 in D.C. They're wealthy cities. One is a government center. The other one is the finance center in Germany. Before I continue, the paper is accessible online for free, and I'll give you a QR code later, and was co-authored with two of my students, one PhD student, Dennis Thiemann, and one master student, Brian Shelton. Now, these cities were mainly interesting for us because they both were able to increase the percentage of all trips made by bicycle from 1 to 5% in DC over about a 20-year period, and from 6% to 20% in Frankfurt. The research goals were to compare bicycling in DC and in Frankfurt, which are two cities that had adapted their transport systems to car travel and then sort of turned towards promoting bicycling. So the goal was to identify lessons for bicycle promotion from both cities by comparing the histories, timelines, strategies, and bicycle-friendly measures implemented since about 1990. The data for our research we got from publicly available reports, plans, and documents, published documents, unpublished information from the city governments, and several 60 to 90-minute in-depth interviews with current and former bicycle planners in both cities. This doesn't show up properly. So here we looked at what did the cities do to promote bicycling, and they used a mix of soft measures like education, bike maps, but also hard infrastructure measures, and that's what we see here. In blue, we see the bike lanes in DEC in the year 2000 and 2019, so they increased considerably. They both had bike share systems, they both promoted bike parking, but importantly, in the stories that the planners told us, in both cities, planners had to spend a lot of time building relationships within the city administration, to connect bicycling to transport planning, to traffic engineering, to site development review, and to build these relationships to integrate bicycling into everyday decision making. And that's what a lot of time they spent initially was doing that, building those relationships, and then growing their staff and including bicycling in many of their efforts. In addition, of course, Frankfurt has a much longer history of having car restrictive policies in place that make car travel less attractive, which helps explain their stronger success in promoting bicycling and achieving a higher share of that. I'm almost out of time, 3 minutes is short. This is the paper. There's a QR code to access the paper. If any questions, let me know. And while I have your attention, I also want to quickly promote our new book called Cycling for Sustainable Cities with MIT Press. It's over 40 authors and experts in planning, engineering, public health, and geography who explain how to make cycling safe, practical, and convenient from 5 continents. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ralph. So I failed to let everyone know that I did ask these presenters to keep their presentations to 3 minutes apiece. So Ralph, excellent job. We do have time for one question. If there is a question in the audience, I don't see any in the chat, but feel free to add one in the chat. Any question there for Ralph? Okay. So we will be, I've already made the slides available online. Ralph's QR code is there. Thank you again, Ralph. And next up is Celeste Chavez. And Celeste deserves a big round of applause, y'all. She has a new baby at home and she's still here with us. So welcome, Celeste.
Thank you. All right, in 3 minutes, a brief overview of a study that we did on converting to e-bikes for the Richmond Bike Share. This was in partnership with the University of Maryland with Dr. Vanessa Frias Martinez. So we used data from April 2019 to December 2019, which was when they first started to converting their fleet over to e-bikes. In April, about 25% of the fleet was converted and 43% of trips taken were on e-bike. And then by December of the same year, 65% of the fleet was converted to e-bike and 90% of the trips were made by e-bike. I do apologize, throughout the presentation, I'm going to use e-bike and pedelec interchangeably. So they had pedal electric assist bikes that were being used by RVA Bike Share. So in the figure on the right, you can see how the trends have increased. The blue is the percentage of trips on pedelec bikes each month from April to December. So we looked at kind of 3 key things. We had trip attribute data for every trip, as well as the GPS trajectories that we mapped using MapBot's map matching API. So we looked at different trip attributes, origin destination analysis, as well as the routing, looking at which roads are being used and the types of roads that were being used. So briefly for trip attributes, we use t-tests to compare the pedelec bikes to traditional bikes. What we found was that pedelec bikes were associated with longer trip distances, shorter trip times, and of course, higher speed. And then we also found that those pedal assist bikes were favored by people who had memberships. So you can see On the left are people who have annual memberships, and then you see those who have like daily passes and stuff. What we're not clear on is why we see that those who are members tend to use the pedal assist bikes more often. We think it's just knowing how to identify the bike, because they have a lightning bolt on the back fin of the bike to identify the different two bike types. We didn't see much difference in terms of the starting and ending station between those who use the electric bikes and those who use the regular bikes. For both, most trips were primarily recreational. We did look at trips that started and ended at different stations, which we call OD trips. On average, those were 2.3 miles long. And then those that started and ended at the same station, which we're calling touring trips, were of course a bit longer at 3.4 miles, but there were no significant differences between e-bike users and the regular bikes. This is the part that gets kind of interesting, is looking at which roads were being used between the two types. So e-bike users spent a higher proportion of their trip time on major roads compared to traditional bike users who favored minor roads. And we also see that e-bikes were used further outside of the city. So on the left, you have e-bikes, where the purple is a greater concentration of trips. And then on the right, you have your traditional bikes. So if you want to learn more, there is a QR code as well as a short link if you want to see the full report. So thank you.
Thank you, Celeste. We have time for one question for Celeste, if anyone has any questions. I know 3 minutes is not a long time. Okay, let's move on. I believe our next presentation is Keenan Zhang.
There are no questions, but there were a lot of cameras taking pictures of the URL code. So well done.
Yeah, I want to read this study, definitely. Thank you, Celeste.
Does that work if you're remote?
Is Keenan in the room? Great. Okay. Please correct me if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Morning, everyone. I'm Keenan Zhang from Northwestern University, and today I'll be presenting our work on the dogless bike sharing system. So the dogless bike sharing system, or the scooter sharing, has been growing rapidly in recent years. And particularly in China, the total number of bikes increased more than 10,000-fold from 2015 to 2017. And the average daily trip in 2018 is over 60 million. So coming with this growth are a number of problems. One of them is the destructive competition between bike sharing operators, which attempted to win the market with low price and massive bike supply. As a result, public space like the metro entrance is often blocked by bikes. And meanwhile, the operators are also keep struggling. They keep struggling with the costly maintenance and rebalancing. So in face of these problems, cities in China have been started to regulate the bike sharing market. However, making an effective policy is no easy task. Even setting an upper bound on the total number of bikes could largely affect the operator's strategy and travelers' mode choice. So this work set out to develop an analytical tool to guide the policy design. So our model consider an aggregate bike sharing market with single operator. On the demand side, we consider travelers make choice between bike sharing and other modes, while on the supply side, the operator decides on the fleet size and pricing. We further develop physical models to determine the time a biker needs to access an empty bike, and also the rebalancing distance. So compared to other works, our model is much easier to analyze, and also we hope to strike a balance between the model tractability and realism. So we calibrate our model with empirical bike sharing data collected in Chengdu, China, and study 3 counterfactual scenarios where the operator aims to maximize its profit, its ridership, and also social welfare. So we first found in all scenarios, the optimal bike fleet is far less than the status quo. So this confirms a huge oversupply and waste of bikes in the current market. Sorry, I don't know what happened to the table, but there should be some headers. So the first column is maximize profit, second one, ridership, third one, social welfare, and last one, status quo. And we also found the choice of policy instrument really depends on the operator's objective. So if the operator aims to maximize its profit, then limiting the price is more effective than controlling the fleet size. However, if the operator aims to maximize its market share, then setting an upper bound on the fleet size becomes a dominant strategy. Sorry, I couldn't put our QR code on the slide, but you are very welcome to stop by our poster tomorrow morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Keenan. And I just heard from the chat that the QR codes are working, and it's good to know that people can learn more tomorrow morning. Next up is Josh Davidson. Oh, I'm sorry. Peter, are there any questions for Keenan in the room? I didn't mean to jump over that.
Question? No, thank you very much.
All right. Okay. Josh Davidson is next.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm going to be presenting on work conducted with my colleagues, Stephanie Nam, Shreya Karam, Fatima Karoma, Ellie Kim, and Dr. Megan Ryerson. Stephanie, Shreya, and Dr. Ryerson are all here, so you can ask them more questions about the project afterwards if you're interested. So we wanted to look at the long-running question of who uses bike share and how, with the natural experiment of the interruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. We used the case study of our hometown of Philadelphia and the Indigo system. You can see that bike share stations are quite concentrated in Philadelphia compared to the city's boundaries, but they're widely distributed across very different parts of the city, which we proxy for by the red boundaries on the last map, which are the planning districts that the city uses to organize city planning efforts and reflect very different socioeconomic and demographic profiles across the city. The research questions that we ask in the study is, what's the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on average daily bike share trip durations? And second, how does this effect differ across population groups, which again, we use the proxy of the planning districts as a different kind of measure of population effects. The methods that we employ are interrupted time series approach, and then we fit these time series models first at the entire system level for the time series of the data, and then again for each of the planning districts that feature bike share docking stations. The model is relatively simple. Sorry, the screen covers on the left trip duration as a function of time, the treatment, which is the beginning of the pandemic, an interaction term between time and the treatment of the pandemic, and then we control for seasonality by including fixed effects per month, per calendar month of the year. And so this is the time series trends for average daily bike share trip durations. The plot at the top is for the entire system, and you see a massive bump right when the pandemic starts. Trip durations go up dramatically compared to the seasonal trend that they follow, and then we start to see things return to normal as we move towards 2021. So exiting the summer of 2020, moving into 2021, things return to normal. So there's a lot more fluctuation and variation across the planning districts. It's a similar trend across each of the planning districts is at the system level. An important thing to note is that across every single calendar month of the year and all the data that we have through September of 21, trip durations are higher, statistically significantly higher in the COVID period compared to the non-COVID period, even in like pretty miserable cycling weather like February in Philadelphia, right? We're seeing longer trips. The difference gets much bigger when it's nice out, but we're seeing substantial differences even in gross weather. And then in the interrupted time series models, if you control for COVID, there's no effective time, right? Trip duration just follows the same trend from 2016 through 2022. No change. There's no effect of time on trip duration. But when you add, but there's a substantial and positive effect for that indicator term for the treatment for the beginning of the COVID-19 period. This varies across planning districts, that effect size from anywhere from 6 or 7 minutes to like a 12-minute increase. But then the treatment, the time times treatment, that interaction term is negative, which shows that during the COVID period, right? March 2020 through now, we start to see things return to normal. So there's that big bump and then a return back to relatively normal time series trends. What we've kind of derived from all of this, the implications for policy, is that the effect of the pandemic on trip duration is substantial and positive, and substantial and positive across very diverse parts of the city. It wasn't just like predominant areas that feature predominant demographic patterns of bike share users in history saw big bumps, or vice versa, that only areas that saw people who normally don't use bike share saw big bumps. So like everybody saw big bumps in their use as measured by trip duration during COVID. What we derive from this is two things. One, bike share can absorb and adapt to crises so they can provide mobility resilience in times of crisis, and do so for diverse populations, which we suggest means that bike share can provide also social resilience in times of need. But it's really important and necessary to measure post-COVID effects, which we can't derive yet, considering our circumstances at the moment. Policy can learn from pandemic period and advance equity by building on pandemic use patterns. That's the biggest one. Like, we need to do a deep dive and ask people who are taking those longer trips during the beginning of the pandemic, like why and how and what for. Link with new safe physical infrastructure, pop-up road closures, new bike lanes, permanent road closures. We think that's a key mechanism for pushing this forward, and continuing to expand services, particularly into new geographies to better serve the underserved. With that, thank you. I'm presenting this poster at 1:30 this afternoon at the Eisenhower session, and then tomorrow morning, again, at the micromobility poster session. So come by if you want to talk more about this. The code's all open source. The data is all free. I'd be happy to send around, so feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much, Josh. Time for one question.
Yeah, great.
It's a great question. So the question was, did trip frequency go up at the same rate that trip duration went up? That's an awesome question, and that's actually in the paper. That's one of our questions for areas for future research. So if you're going to be at the Association of American Geographers meeting at the end of February, we could talk more about trip frequency, because that's going to be part of that study. So yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Josh. And everyone, go see Josh tomorrow at the poster, or this afternoon. So glad to get to have a sneak preview of all these findings. So our last 3-minute presenter is Katerina Delali. Is she in the room?
Yes, she is.
And Katerina actually had 2 papers which were among the top ranked for the committee. So you're going to get to see 2 presentations from Katerina. 6 minutes of time. Thanks so much.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the chance to present. So this is a work part of my dissertation, and the objective was to see how the different types of bicycle treatments affect bicycle safety. And I was also particularly interested to understand whether, when we have segment level treatments, have a different effect on the segment level, and how those treatments behave at the intersection level. So for this objective, we developed 2 types of crash prediction models, one for the segments and one for the intersections. So the analysis took place in Portland, Oregon, because we had a lot of data available to work in there. And on the segment level, we developed logistic regression models to predict the crash probability, whether a segment has a crash versus does not have a crash. And the explanatory variables for the analysis are the annual average daily traffic, annual average bicycle traffic, and the treatment type. And for treatments, we have conventional bike lanes, protected bike lanes, and SAROs. And from the results, we can see that protected bike lanes and then SAROs are safer compared to conventional bike lanes. So they have more chances to reduce crash probability. And the basis for this comparison is treatments that have no bicycle treatments. However, I should highlight here that these findings are very specific for Portland, Oregon, because the city implements SAROs in locations with low traffic and low speed limits. And this is why we see that SAROs perform better compared to conventional bike lanes. Now, moving at signalized intersections, we developed a crash prediction model using the Poisson regression, and you can see the equation on the top of the screen. Now the explanatory variables are annual average daily traffic and annual average bicycle traffic. And then to explore the impact of the treatments, we had, let me move this. We had two different models. So the first model that you can see on the left-hand side of the screen focused on the impact of segment-level treatments at signalized intersections. And we can see intersections that have more segment treatments experience a higher crash frequency. And this is an indication that additional analyses need to take place in those intersections to understand why we have a higher crash frequency. And then on the right-hand side model, we can see the impact of two intersection treatments, the markings that indicate where bicyclists should cross, noted as crossings, and also bike boxes. And again, we can see that those intersections that feature these treatments or one of those treatments experience a higher crash frequency. And here it is very important to clarify that the treatment itself does not cause the crashes, but it means that in that intersection, there are other reasons that crashes take place. And again, those intersections need further investigation. So with that, I'm concluding the first study. We would like to thank RIDE for providing us bicycle count data, and also the City of Portland and Oregon Department of Transportation and Portland State University for all the data availability that have available online. If you have any questions on that. Yes, so. For here. So we see that all of the treatments.
Wait, Katerina, sorry, before you answer, could you repeat the question for those of us online?
Okay, the question is whether the odds ratio for bicycle treatments is lower than 1, and what does this actually mean, right? No, so these are two different models. into different parts of the roadway. So this is for the segment level, what we have away from the intersection. And the odds ratio are showing us that all of the bicycle treatments have the ability to reduce crash probability. However, they do this in a different rate. So protected bike lanes compared to sharrows and conventional bike lanes are more likely to reduce crash probability at the segment. This is so there is a safety ranking between the different types of bicycle treatments at the segment. If there is another question. Thank you. And so this is the second paper we submitted in August. This is a project funded by Massachusetts Department of Transportation. And the overall objective of the project was to see how bicyclists and motorists in Massachusetts use bike boxes. And we focused on the bike boxes as you can see them in the left-hand side of the screen. And we did not explore at all the two-stage turning boxes that you can see on the right. Actually, the team at UMass is investigating those in a different project, which is happening right now. So to the bike boxes, there was multiple types of data, such as crash analysis, traffic conflict analysis. There was a big inventory of all the bike boxes in Massachusetts, focusing on their design characteristics. However, for now, for this presentation, I will only focus on the field data collection. And particularly, this concerns 6 signalized intersections in the greater Boston area that features multiple bike boxes. And for those intersections, we collected 24-hour video data, and that was analyzed using a specific software provided by Street Simplified. And through this data, we were able to analyze how bicyclists and motorists behave when they were at intersection with bike boxes. So here, regarding the driver behavior, our objective was to see whether they comply with the use of bike box. So essentially, when they are at the intersection with the bike box stopped in red, motorists should remain behind the bike box. And we see in which cases they do that. And overall, we noticed that 60% of the drivers complied with bike boxes. However, our finding compared to other findings from the literature shows that motorists had lower compliance rates, which is a worrying thing, indicating that there should be more education on drivers, how they should be using these bicycle treatments. And then the second part of the analysis focused on how bicyclists use bike boxes. And essentially, that was the main concern from the Mass DOT point of view, because they had some concerns that bicyclists are not sure how these treatments are supposed to improve their safety and mobility at the intersection. So as you can see here, the bike box can be divided in several areas. We have the case of areas A, B, and C, when there is one through lane, and then we also have an additional area in the bike box in the case of left turning vehicles. So through the heat map there, you can see that most of the bicyclists are waiting on area B in the bike box, which is somehow not the fully correct use of the bike box, while they should be staying in area A. So again, this is an indication that bicyclists are not always aware of how they should be using bike boxes. And again, here it is of great importance to have educational campaigns so that they can learn how these devices can work and protect them. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, also you can email Professor Eleni Christophe and Professor Cheng Boai, who were the PIs of the project. But I can also answer a question if you have. Thank you.
I'm gonna take one question from the chat box, and then because those in the room can grab you during the break if you don't mind. So we have a question. We have a couple of questions. Did all of the bike box study sites include a no turn on red restriction?
Yes, they did. Yes.
Okay. And then another procedural question, was the street simplified analysis a manual video review, an automated process, or a combination?
I'm not quite sure of that. I think it was an automated process. And this is how we produced the maps you can see here. I don't think any manual analysis was involved, but I have an asterisk from that.
Okay, great. And we have Katerina's information if people want to follow up with her afterward. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for the 3-minute presentations. This was an excellent, I think we don't have time for additional questions now, but please grab Katerina during the break. At this point in the schedule, we are actually at our break. We are running a little bit behind, but again, we did not plan to go the full time. So we're doing all right, but I want to be aware that folks might need a bathroom break or a coffee break. So Peter, we had originally scheduled a 20-minute break that would put us back at 10:15 your time. Does that still feel like the right move?
Yeah, I think that's great. I wonder where I can get an espresso that looks just like that, though.
I know, isn't that beautiful?
A lot of the coffee shops are closed around here, so anybody
so yeah,
we'll see you in a few minutes.
Yeah, sounds great. 10:15 Eastern time, everyone.
I can hear you, Rebecca.
I'm wondering if Peter can hear us. Everyone, if you're on the line, we're gonna probably start back in a minute or two. Thanks for your patience and for joining us this morning.
Oh, that's the beauty. The green arrow does that. Yeah. Bike symbol with the arrow. But you got to clear it allowed, but now it's chicken egg. You doing okay? Oh, Rebecca's calling. Okay. Yes. Yeah. It looks like we're I have, so I set 2 chairs. I moved the DC and so it's kind of 6 chairs from work. So you get 2 of the 3. How about that? Problem is you might not be able to hear that. Okay, great.
Hi guys, are you there? Is anybody
Hi,
there?
Krista. Yeah, I think we're waiting for you.
So I was just wondering, I'm not getting everybody's name. We have like 10 more people that joined after after we did introductions. So if that's important to you, do you want me to send around a sheet?
Krista, it sounded like Brooke Struve was going to create a QR code for folks in the room to use. So if she was coordinating with Peter on that. So if we can do that for folks in the room, that should supplement your work. And then I'm going to keep this sign-in sheet that I've already been tweeting about and that we've already put in the chat for that. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And everyone on the chat, we're going to have a couple more updates from Peter and Krista on the workshops, and then we're going to move into the panel. And I just want to set expectations that it is possible that this isn't going to work as well because we do need to keep the 6 feet of distance between the panel members. So for example, it's a 3-person panel, and as you can see, there are 2 chairs in the space. We also might not be able to hear them that well. So they have all agreed to do this for me another time virtually, which is amazing and so kind of them. I want to also acknowledge that Dr. Carrie Watkins from Georgia Tech is sponsoring part of this chat. So if you don't get to see it, we will find another way for this conversation to take place because it is super important. But I'm going to cross my fingers that we can somehow pull it off today as well. So thanks for your patience. I think I just spoke with Peter. We're about to start things back up on that side.
That's right. We are ready to start. So I guess first thing before we get to that great panel, you will let's see. I guess I'll try out the audio. Let's see if can you hear me if I'm sitting in the chair, and can you hear me out there? Okay, in the room I'm good. How about virtually?
You're good virtually. I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So just a reminder to enunciate. It's tricky with the masks and microphones being what they are. We're doing the best with a tricky situation. So, oh, that's a great picture. Wonderful picture of Peter Firth, Rebecca. Thank you for scraping that from my Twitter stream. We had a really wonderful workshop on livability versus safety trade-offs in the urban road design context. It was a really fascinating case study. I want to thank the team from Kittleson Associates who put that together. Connor Semler, Meredith Hermanas. I mean, it was a big group of folks that really brought a variety of speakers together to talk about this important issue, and including elements of how important livability and green space is in the nature of what we're doing. I talked about bicycle accommodation of streets and screamed out that we shouldn't be talking about accommodation anymore. We should be talking about prioritization. That's really what we're doing in our community in Portland. Thank you, Krista. And so that's a different sort of conversation. So it was an interesting sort of perspective. The case studies, as you saw Peter Firth at the board there, there was a good range of what people thought about. The end product was actually in place in Somerville, Massachusetts. So that was fascinating that the community actually went through this process. They didn't end up with I think the Peter Firth option, which I thought was fantastic. He took the 2 different roadways, 2 30-foot wide roadways that were parallel, basically a boulevard treatment, and said, well, what if you just made one for cars and made one a beautiful esplanade, a very European sort of approach? I was like, okay, that's very much outside the box thinking, sort of thing we should be doing in a research discussion. The end result was actually in Somerville, a bus bike lane. That was, so they repurposed one of the travel lanes for bus bike. It's completely red, so it's pretty clear to users. It prioritizes people on buses, and the cyclists are able to use that lane as well. There's, of course, a good, healthy debate about the comfort of a bus bike lane combined. So that was, that was part of the conversations that we had on Sunday. So I think this is a successful workshop. And with that, I guess I'll ask if there's any questions, and if anybody's here to report on the Safe Systems a Reality workshop.
Peter, Krista will be our report for the Safe Systems workshop.
I thought it was Krista, but I didn't want to name her and then be wrong. So you want to take that there?
Okay.
Peter, well, sorry, Krista, can I ask one question? Peter, I guess my question to you is, you mentioned that you were screaming about we need to be past accommodation, and did you feel like you were preaching to the choir in that workshop, or are there things that you could tell us, those of us online and in the room, about maybe, is there anything you learned with regard to how we can, push past the boundaries against which we've been constrained in the past, and do that outside of the box thinking, but not just the thinking, actually the implementation?
That's a great question. I think it was a bit of a mix. We had over 100 people there in our session. One of the speakers talked a little bit about the potential for safety and crashes and accidents, and of course with accidents, it's that That's a term that I think we're trying to change the terminology with and use crash, not accident. I think the competing objectives. I mean, the title of the session kind of throws you a little bit to, you have to make a false choice of livability versus safety. In reality, those things are the same thing in many of the design options that we're choosing in practice in Portland. So I guess I think there's still work to be done to help people that are coming to the profession that maybe come from a more suburban, rural setting, to recognize the need to prioritize cycling on our infrastructure. So more work to be done.
Thank you.
Hopefully Krista had a better experience with the safe system in reality.
Sure about that. Should I go ahead?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to stand up so everybody can hear me. So how many of you were at when Sunday morning, 9 a.m., Making Safe Systems a Reality, Planning to Implementation workshop? Yes, okay, so you guys go ahead and fill in because I didn't take copious notes at that workshop, but when Peter was just describing, we had over 100 people on Sunday morning that were so excited about learning about safe systems that they showed up bright and early to talk about this really important topic. So that was heartening to see so many people there. And we talked about, generally they had some presentations about safe systems, but then we broke out to try to create some research needs statements and understand where we need to go from here. And they broke them out into 3 categories: design, policy, speed, emergency, law enforcement, automation and connected vehicles, legal, and then somebody else jumped in and said friction, because friction's a big predictor of crashes, actually, and maintenance of roadways. So those are kind of the categories we broke out into and had smaller group discussions. So I cannot, we came together, but I didn't take all the notes. So we gave all these new research needs statements to Don Milton, who's compiling some big list of all these statements because there were a lot. But I can only report from the design group that we saw a lot of need for looking beyond just the intersection and looking into the whole network, what's going on with the context of what we're seeing, instead of just looking at a one road segment, because that was the focus is, oh, well, we've got this many crashes here at this, and what kind of, do we want a roundabout or one of these R-cuts or diverging diamond? And so we're trying to expand the thought. Of course, there was also like very little discussion of bicycling and pedestrians and vulnerable road users in general, like people who are blind, people who have other disabilities were kind of out of the discussion, so that needed to be added. And there was just a lot of things that we don't know and we need to know. Okay, so those who were there, I saw my little view. Can anyone else wants to add from their working group or their perspective? What other findings? Please.
Hi, I'm Charles Ruda. I'm with Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. I was in the speed and safe system breakout group. And so some of the research needs that we came up with were how does vehicle power capacity impact the drivers, and the use of vehicle speed governors outside of the US with micromobility. We had making speed tickets or speeding tickets for non-crashes and data publicly available for analysis, because most of that data is not available right now. And we found that speed is underreported, even in crash analyses, because you often have to rely on one of the parties involved to admit to speeding, which they're not going to do. We were going to analyze, or we thought about analyzing the placement of objects on the side of roadways with motion parallax and seeing whether the distances and the perceived distance of those objects away from the roadway, how that would affect speed. Speed studies at intersections and interchanges. Physical factors affecting why people drive the way they do. We suggested instead of, well, an alternative to how people approach travel. I know for me personally and a lot of my friends, I'm 21, I just turned 21. So a lot of my friends, when they drive to and from a place, what they say is, well, how fast did I get there? And if we use a different metric, which is how safe did you get there, where you have tools like the Progressive and the State Farm, the devices in the cars, they'll give you a score, but they're not reported to us. And so if that was reported to us after each and every trip, how that would affect the mindset of drivers. And then finally, the influence of popular media, such as like Fast and Furious movies, on driving behaviors and public opinion of speeding.
I love that, that gamification of how'd you get here? Actually, car sharing, Car2Go had like a, how green was your trip? How much were you on the accelerator? How much did you brake? And I remember trying to see if I could get 99 on my trip. That's a great on that for safety. That's fantastic. I love that idea.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else want to share their views on the workshop? Okay, well, let's just say there was a huge amount of discussion, tons of great ideas, and tons of research needs that came out of this.
Any
Thank you,
questions
Krista.
from virtual?
I think people are just agreeing with you, Peter, the idea of the different, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of the gentleman who just gave his perspective or his experience in the conference, but just the idea that we change the metric. All part of changing our driving culture, right? So I hope that there will be notes disseminated from those workshops. So when we write up the notes from this meeting and send them out to our friends and members, I'll try to coordinate with the workshop organizers to see if there's additional information I can include. But thank you both so much for that update. For those of us who weren't there, really appreciate that. I think at this point, we are at the point in our program where we get to move to the panel. So I want to take a minute to welcome up to the front of the room three illustrious panelists, Oboi Reed, Jesus Barajas, and Stefanie Brodie. And I'm going to give a very brief introduction of these three folks as they're coming up to sit down. And again, you know, it looks like we're only going to be able to see two of them at a time, but hopefully we'll be able to see everyone. And then I welcome them to expand on their introduction. The questions you see on the screen are questions that we all pre-agreed that we would talk about, but of course they're going to talk amongst themselves, and the discussion is going to go where it will, because this is a topic that could take, you know, well over an hour, days and days to really discuss everything. I was joking, it's you know, at least the source of at least one dissertation, but probably many. So is Jesus up there yet? I can't see him, but is he there?
I'm here.
Well, yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, so with no further ado, I want to recognize Oboi Reed, who is the president and CEO of the Equiticity Racial Equity Movement, operationalizing racial equity by harnessing collective power through research, programs, advocacy, and community mobility rituals to improve the lives of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. And we'll include a link to Equiticity in our notes so that you all can look at the website to learn more. Dr. Stefanie Brodie is the research practice lead and an associate at Tool Design, where she specializes in transportation policy and planning, particularly in the realm of incorporating equity and other social sustainability considerations into decision-making. She's also a noted expert in micromobility. And Dr. Jesus Barajas is an assistant professor in the Department of Environmental Science and Policy at the University of California, Davis, who studies why and how people travel, what accounts for the differences we see in travel behavior and safety, particularly for historically marginalized population groups, and what those differences mean for planning and policy. So we are so thrilled and grateful to have you all here with us today. I also want to recognize Georgia Tech for partially sponsoring this session so that we can compensate you for your time. And with that, I welcome the three of you to add anything to your bio, or we can just jump right in. So let me know how you'd like to begin.
Jump.
Let's jump. All right, let's do it. Okay, so we started off with the softball question. Haha. What is equity in the context of bicycle research? And Oboi, maybe I'll ask you to go first if you don't mind.
Are we just giving up every time? I think we.
On the online?
Are you able to hear us?
I can hear you. Yeah.
All right. Cool. Equity in the context of bicycle research, it includes a lot. A few things that come to mind when we think about this work is a focus on marginalized communities, better understanding the severity of existing inequities. The research is executed in full partnership with community-based organizations who are on the ground in neighborhoods. Those organizations, participants in the research, and other partners are compensated for their participation. And the research is aiming to solve for structural racism. In the context of cycling, it is an effort to move beyond the European model of cycling and look at other existing models that may be more appropriate and timely for marginalized communities to adopt. And then finally, beginning to move towards what we call a racialized healing process, which there's a number of steps. I won't go through all of them. It starts with acknowledging the past harms that the cycling and transportation sector has inflicted on Black and brown neighborhoods, and ensuring that there's some processes, there's tactics and strategies to remove those harms, repair those harms, and get to a place where structural racism is no longer embedded in the transportation sector.
Stefanie, can you could you speak up a little bit, or maybe take a step toward the mic? Thank you so much.
So I start by thinking about how I define how we look at equity generally, and that being addressing and solving for disparate outcomes, specifically for people who have been historically marginalized. So that's Black and brown people, that's Indigenous people, that's people with disabilities. Those are people who have not necessarily been included in decision-making processes and have, as a result, usually negative adverse effects. So making sure that we're addressing those concerns and allowing them to participate fully in society. So when it comes to bicycle research, that's understanding the barriers that they have to engaging in bicycling, whether that be physical barriers or policy barriers. And then not just understanding and recognizing those barriers and the outcomes, but then solving for them. So how do we include them into the decision-making processes? How do we make sure that those outcomes that they have historically faced are being addressed and they're being prioritized in decision-making?
I mean, I agree. I think with the panelists here, so it's hard to add a lot, but I think one of the things that's important for me in thinking about equity in bicycle research is getting beyond the questions of distribution. Like, I think we spend a lot of time understanding like what's happening to who and where,
but getting at the questions of participation and what are methods of participation that's going to lead to equitable bicycle systems. What is access to power and how do levers of power work? What goes into decision making? How are we sort of measuring systems for equity? I think those are questions that are still ready to be solved. I also think, you know, as a person involved in bicycle research, I think a lot about the methods by which we do this work. And for me, that a question that comes up is what data matters? Who is contributing these data? Who's missing from the data that we're using? And how do we work to make sure that data, the data are representative of the people that it needs to be if we're kind of solving problems for communities that have been left out. One other thing to add here that I got from a panel that I was recently participating in is sort of moving from a mindset of kind of deficit-based models, like who doesn't have access to infrastructure, for example, to questions of sort of asset-based planning and asset-based questions. So what skills, knowledge, expertise do folks bring to the table, and how can we sort of launch off from that to answer interesting questions that are going to help lift folks up even more than what they already have.
Thank you all. I'm trying to take notes and listen to you at the same time, and it's a little challenging, but because you're just saying so much, so many good questions, so many good points, and I really appreciate it. So from there, let's go to a question that we had talked about when we were planning this session, which is, you know, given what you've just described as, you know, some key questions and some key aspects of equity in the context of bicycle research, what research do you need, or do the folks with whom you work need, to support bicycling equity work? Maybe for this one, let's start with Stefanie and then go to Oboi and then Jesus. That works.
So I think that less so now, but qualitative research has been undervalued in our transportation research, transportation engineering research space, and interviews and focus groups with communities, graphic explorations, and then applying quantitative results within the context of community input. I think that those are places where our research can be supported. So opening our understanding and our welcoming of research methods, so kind of exploring and expanding to more qualitative methods. We also need to continue to elevate those qualitative methods of research and understanding that, as Lisa was saying, there's data quality, there's data limitations as well. So a lot of our demographic understanding is based on census data, and that's limited in our understanding. That's limited in our ability to use at lower or granular scales. And even if we do have more granular data, we're not going to understand necessarily the lived experiences without talking to people who are in the community, or without working with them to what their needs and their experiences are. And I'll also just note some of the specific areas that I think we need to support in our research, and that primarily safety, so understanding safety, perceived safety concerns, as well as real safety concerns for people who are bicycling, and health outcomes potentially that they might be experiencing, and how those might be disparate based on communities. And then also differences between barriers, biking, but primarily the needs that are disparate between different communities. So
there may be ranges of identified needs for folks. And that might change based on the city that we're in, based on the urban, suburban, rural context that we're in, and based on neighborhoods within a city. So being aware that those needs will be experienced by the individuals that are there. So having spaces where we can include that into our research.
There's a few things we need. And when I say we, I'm talking as someone who's a racial equity tactician, an advocate, community organizer, using bikes to improve neighborhoods. One of the things we need is we need to begin with an understanding that the European model of cycling has failed Black and brown neighborhoods. That's reflected in traditional bike share in this country. That's reflected in how we think about infrastructure in this country. That model has failed our neighborhoods. There are other models. So part of what I would say we need is an exploration of other models around the world, like South America, like Ciclovia. And one of the things I love about Ciclovia is that there's a focus on socializing people around the active mobility, not a focus on pure transportation. In Black and brown neighborhoods, the barriers to us cycling are vast and entrenched and severe. And I like our potential to ride bikes when the focus is on socialization over transportation. So the research should help us understand that dynamic and how do we move the needle on socializing people around mobility first before we try to convince them that they should ride a bike to work. A few other things is we have to explore how bikes and the activity of cycling solves for our most pressing problems. In Black and brown neighborhoods, our number one concern is violence. How does community bicycle rides, or more people biking at the neighborhood level, how does that address violence? That's what we should be researching so that we could see it in the event it does solve for reducing violence. Then that's a strategy that we should explore to reduce violence in our neighborhood over criminalizing our neighborhoods with more police enforcement. And then with regards to enforcement, we have to understand the dampening effect that racialized bicycle enforcement has on cycling in Black and brown neighborhoods. And then when you pair that with the inequities of lack of infrastructure in our neighborhoods, you have an exponential dampening effect. So we should understand how racialized enforcement is helping to stop Black and brown people from riding their bikes because they don't want to have to interact with the police. Now I'll stop there.
It's hard to add to perspectives. I think that the perspective that qualitative research is important. Qualitative data is data, and I think in the research community, there's at least on the sort of the engineering side of the world, there's a little less recognition of the value that qualitative perspective brings. And so I think Stefanie's right in the importance there. And then Obai's passion shines through on some of the intersecting issues that the communities that he lives in and works with and works for face. And I think to provide perspective, it's those intersections that are important to understand in cycling research. So how does cycling intersect with policing? How does it intersect with housing and housing security and gentrification and neighborhood change? How does it intersect with safety and security, personal security, health? We've done a good job on, but there's more to be done there. How does it intersect with community development? I think these questions of intersection with cycling are the ones that are important to. I already talked about data. I think sort of understanding who contributes data and who's present in the data and how the data are used is important. And then for me, I think thinking about sort of hitting it where cycling intersects with technology is important. So sort of the e-bikes have exploded over the last year, and saw Chris Cherry earlier, who's done a lot of work already on that. But thinking about again the intersection. So with the e-bikes comes, with the explosion of e-bikes comes an explosion in batteries and battery manufacturing, and what is the manufacturing and mining of the metals needed for those batteries? What does the disposal of those batteries mean for Black and Brown communities in particular, which have historically faced environmental justice issues with respect to that? I think there's issues to work on there in research.
Even access to those e-bikes.
Right.
Like who can use these e-bikes, and knowing that they allow people to bike farther and bike more easily. You know, people who might have some physical difficulties that are easier for them to use, but they're also expensive. So there's another issue there.
What are the policies that support those kinds of that kind of access to? Yeah.
I would add to that conversation the need to support non-traditional actors in the space of micromobility. There's two groups we don't trust. That is capitalists and bureaucrats. And those are the two groups that are delivering micromobility at the neighborhood level. So, you know, our position is that there's room for non-traditional actors in that space, like nonprofit organizations or community-based organizations to deliver micromobility, and not leave it to capitalists and bureaucrats to do it for us.
I'm trying to type all of this in Twitter in a long thread. You guys this is so rich. Thank you so much. So there's so many questions that I have to follow on, but we'll stick to the script for now. So Oboi, you just mentioned that, there's this lack of trust with businesses, capitalists, and bureaucracy. And we talked in our preparation, and you mentioned that there's this space for, advocates to join in, and Stefanie and Jesus, some of the things that you've said, clearly talking about qualitative research and community input. I think we tend to think of that being associated at times with advocacy, although I hope that as a profession, we're doing a better job of recognizing the importance of community input from a broad range of people, and not just the folks who have the time to make what historically those 2 p.m. meetings on a Friday, at the library downtown, right? So I hope we're moving as a profession to broader input. At the same time, we talked about the sort of times, the gap between what researchers who might be sitting in an ivory tower or even just in a business, what they're thinking about in terms of research, and what folks on the ground might need. So I know we've talked about this a little bit, but I don't know if you want to add anything about making bicycling research more relevant specifically for the advocacy community and for practitioners who may or may not be part of the bureaucracy you just mentioned, Oboi. Can you all talk a little bit about that? And maybe we can start with Jesus, since he's been finishing up each round thus far.
Well, if the question is what do we need to make bicycling more relevant to advocates and practitioners, I'm actually not the person to answer that, because we have advocates and practitioners here. So my answer is listen to them. So I'm going to turn it over to Stefanie Brodie. Yes.
Well, I guess honestly, the breaking down paywalls and open access to the research that's happening at university academia is one of the big challenges that, as a practitioner, I faced. There's so much interest amongst my colleagues to know what the research says and what's, the leading method for, designing at intersections, or what's the safety impacts for this type of design feature, or what's the best approach to engaging with communities. And a lot of the tests that have been done, a lot of the applications of academic work is behind a paywall, and you can't access that easily. So I think that's one of the biggest barriers for making research accessible to practitioners. I see a lot of research that is helpful, and I think being able to take some of the results easily, like having that access to those studies is incredibly helpful for us. So I think that's probably the biggest barrier that
I really appreciate this question, and I'm just going to give a really quick history lesson. Things came to a boil for me in Chicago about 5 years ago, perhaps. Laquan McDonald was murdered. The video was released. US DOJ came in and did an investigation of CPD, found rampant civil rights abuses. The city of Chicago announced its Vision Zero plan, and one of their leading strategies was enforcement. We had enough. We were done. We just couldn't believe that this is where we were in that moment. We put out a call for researchers to come and help us, and Jesus answered that call, in addition to several other researchers. And from the beginning, what really helped me was that Jesus and Dr. Kate Lowe and others came to the table with respect for me as an advocate, and respect for the perspective of a community organization prioritizing racial equity and mostly serving Black and brown neighborhoods. And naturally, I respected them as academics and experts and researchers. And it was that mutual respect that has always been there in our work. I've never felt by them like I was not a peer. They treat me, they treat our team as peers, where we're both bringing expertise to the table. And one of the things I love about our work together is, on one hand, they are actively studying the types of topics we need in support of our advocacy. On the other hand, our advocacy does not interfere with the integrity of their research. Should their work support our advocacy? Awesome. Should the final results not support our advocacy? That's all right. We'll move on to the next topic. So it's all of that that has really created an incredible partnership, and I believe in a number of ways it has our work together has moved the needle in Chicago and has potentially had some impact on other cities in the country.
Thank you, Oboi. And I recognize, Jesus, thanks for calling me out for giving you a thing when actually we should have just directed that one to Oboi as well, and Stefanie. But appreciate your perspectives there, and I really appreciate this idea that this is a peer process, that when you're working with community folks and advocacy folks, there's a different kind of expertise that is absolutely worth respect. I think that hasn't always been recognized. So let's move to a question specifically about TRB then. What do you all see as TRB's role in advancing equity in the broader research community? Maybe Stefanie, start with you for this one.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, TRB is the premier transportation research organization in the U.S. and arguably the world. So it's our responsibility to kind of bring equity to the forefront. And I think, last year we had the theme, the research theme around equity, and there was a significant response to that call. TRB facilitated the conference for advancing transportation equity this year, the first equity focused conference, which was great. It had a positive reception, a ton of presenters and research submitted to that conference. And so, the role of this organization is to keep that perspective at the front. And I think, in the active travel community, I think we're relatively on board with questions of equity because it intersects with sustainability and health and the kind of work that we've been doing for a long time. But there are other subfields where maybe equity isn't at the front of the conversation. Maybe it's not, I don't want to speak for the pavements folks, but maybe equity isn't the first question that they're answering. But there are ways in which it should be embedded in the work that they're doing. And I think, those of us here and those of us in the room and around TRB and the committees that intersect with equity can kind of push the organization to make sure that it does permeate outside of the fields where it has traditionally.
You mentioned pavement. My postdoc was on incorporating social sustainability into pavement. So, so it's a reorganization at TRB. We finally got a committee that's focused primarily on equity and transportation. So I know they've been getting a lot of calls to do work in other areas, and I think that it's important to remember that it's not on that committee to do transportation equity, that it's on all the committees, and that it's across TRB. So I think finding ways to make sure that other committees are bringing equity to the forefront and finding experts that maybe do not sit in that committee, but are able to help support their work.
I really appreciate that that last point around equity not being subjugated to a committee. Racism touches every aspect of our society. Capitalism touches every aspect of our society. Equity must touch every aspect of our society. It must be persistent and pervasive in our society. And that's true for how we think about, it should be true for how we think about equity within TRB. A few things that come to mind for me, one is there are Black and brown, I'm talking as a racial equity tactician. There are Black and brown people on the ground in neighborhoods that have already done the work of defining racial equity, envisioning racial equity, describing how one commits to racial equity. There's the Untokening that has created an entire framework around mobility justice. There's Black Space that created the Black Space Manifesto. These tools exist. TRB doesn't have to go and define equity or racial equity or mobility justice. What TRB needs to do is make a space for us as organizers and advocates to come and be more present in TRB. I'm here as a result of a few people who, sort of made sure that there was space for me at TRB. And what I'm asking is that effort be broadened to bring more advocates and more community organizers into this space. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Oboi. Thank you, Stefanie and Jesus. So last one, I'll just stop trying to I'll leave it to you guys to decide who wants to answer. So Oboi, you just started to talk about this a little bit. How do we break down the barriers to participation in TRB related work? So you mentioned that you're there this year because of a few specific people. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that, and Jesus and Stefanie share your perspectives on what you've heard from other people about barriers to participation in TRB, maybe what, if you have experienced any barriers in the past, what you've experienced, whether that be, you know, related to you know, job or just access or anything like that. I know I've seen and been moved by many tweets about ableism over the last 2 years, and how I remember this one woman tweeted about how for South by Southwest, the members of the disabled community had been asking for years for a virtual option and been told it was too hard. And she was tweeting about how shocked she was and how hurt she was by the fact that as soon as COVID-19 happened, you know, they made it happen for everyone else. So I think there are barriers all over the place. So I wonder if you could speak to, you know, some of your thoughts on how we break those barriers down.
Well, a few years ago, I did speak at TRB, and I felt like TRB was this impenetrable building that you just couldn't, it had no windows. I couldn't figure out how to get in from the website to, you know, being here and trying to figure out where I should be. It's massive. It's massive for someone who's not an academic, who's not experienced with participating in these types of events. It's a massive thing to sort of connect to. So one thing that may be helpful is just some sort of process to onboard new people, especially advocates like myself who are not researchers. So to onboard them and help them get familiar with TRB as an organization, how to navigate the website, you know, how to think about their time at the conference. That would be helpful. Something else is cost for community-based organizations. You know, $1,000 registration, and then travel is prohibitive for many. And then, you know, funding in general is always a top priority. You know, we need funding to do that work, to do our work, and using this venue as a way to perhaps have conversations with potential funders to establish partnerships that may lead to funding will be helpful for community-based organizations and advocates to be here and feel as though it's worth our time.
Your attention to the I echo those sentiments. Oboi, it's funny you mentioned an onboarding process. There is actually an orientation session that TRB provides to new folks, but you didn't even know about it. So there's a challenge there. As you know, someone who is a professor who teaches students in presentation skills, I think we have a responsibility to make sure to help our students and ourselves make sure that our research is communicated in a way that both reflects the rigor of the work that we're doing, but is also accessible to an audience. Oboi and I went to a session yesterday. I asked him what he thought about it. He's like, I don't know, I didn't really understand what was being presented up there. So I think, you know, we have some work in the academic community to do to make sure that our work is accessible, because we're not just speaking to kind of faculty on our level. We're speaking to students who are just entering the profession. We're speaking to lay professionals who may not have expertise in our specific area. We're speaking to people who are just generally interested in topics of transportation. And I think it's important that we kind of hone our storytelling skills to be able to be more inclusive of those perspectives.
And I'll add, since we're on TRB related work, talk a little bit about the CRP and outputs that we produce as researchers for the public research program. And those products are typically designed for state DOTs, for practitioners, but having some space to maybe provide more relatable, accessible outputs for the public, for folks who are interested in transportation but may not have the same level of understanding as a practitioner.
Okay, thank you all. So we've reached the point where we could take a couple of questions from the audience. I have a question in the chat that I can start off with, and then if Peter, if you don't mind kind of fielding, if there are a couple of questions from the audience, that would be great. So this is from Darren Buck. He says, Dr. Brodie made the case for more qualitative research to try to capture the feelings of underserved communities on bicycling. Do any of the panelists have any notable examples of qualitative research that they feel has done a great job of memorializing the perceptions of underserved communities, whether inside of or outside of the transportation sector? So in other words, looking for maybe, you know, some examples or case studies that you could recommend or briefly describe.
I'll give the example of Charles Brown's arrest mobility work. Done a great job of talking to communities, identifying what their barriers are, what the concerns that they have are, and then literally like memorializing it and making it a bigger, like continually growing venture where it's talked about not just in the research space, but in the advocacy space and in practitioner space as well. So I think that's one really great example of building research around the input and insights and experiences of people, in the Black and Brown people especially.
I'll give a quick example. Equiticity has our mobility justice in Chicago research, and Jesus is on our research leadership team, and his work fits under that research as well. On the qualitative side, Dr. Kate Lowe, a professor at University of Illinois at Chicago, led work on qualitative focus groups. There's a series of qualitative focus groups, and one of the things that came out of that work was, and this the audience for those focus groups were Black and Brown, low to moderate income people living on the south and west side of Chicago. One, in addition to many things that were uncovered, was that some of us were deeply concerned about police violence, and our concerns for police violence contributed to how we think about what mode of travel we're willing to take. And that was critical for us because we all, as an advocate and as a community-based organization, we sort of believed that that was true, and this research bared it out. It was a really powerful tool to help practitioners, planning practitioners, understand why we have to think about enforcement differently in our neighborhoods.
I know there's some of the work out of Portland State at National Institute for ITSE, I forgot what TC stands for, but they've done some work around, qualitative work around bike share that I think is interesting and impactful, and some work others have done around kind of the intersections of cycling and gentrification that really sort of highlights issues that don't come out quantitative perspective.
Okay, thank you all for these examples. I'll put trying to call out those people in the when I do the tweets. Other questions from the room or in the chat online? And I guess I also want to just, you know, when we were talking and planning the session beforehand, want to recognize that there was, as we discussed, a lot of directions. There were a lot of directions this conversation could go. So I want to open up to the panelists, actually, Stefanie and Oboi and Jesus, if there are questions you have for each other, or if there's any part of the discussion you want to expand on. We have a few more minutes. I don't want to take up too much time. I think we'll probably have, maybe we'll end in 5 minutes. So yeah, anything you all want to elaborate on or want to come back to?
You guys can just repeat it in the mic. I don't want to walk up and simply, I don't feel like simply. To what degree does it feel extractive to you to participate in a process like this that increases the awareness of equity and opposed George Floyd's work? Oboi, you're not new to TRB, you came many years ago. how does this feel to enter into a space where you feel like you're sharing ideas that you don't ultimately benefit from, say for the participation of people like Dr. Barajas and Kate Lowe and others who came to the rescue at a time most critical. So how did it feel when you're brought to these environments in a time in which it appears to be benefiting others outside of your community?
I'll repeat the question. How does it feel to participate in a TRB session, which may be extractive, given what could, and I'm paraphrasing, what could be considered a faux commitment to equity? I think that's a legitimate question, and certainly there may be people who are similarly situated as myself who do feel like they're participating in something that's potentially extractive. For me, not so much. There's a few things about this experience which doesn't feel extractive. One, I received financial support to be here. Somebody who's actively involved in TRB made it possible for me to travel here. I'm here with people who are actively working on the issues I prioritize, from Jesus to Laura Sant to Jackie Grimshaw. There are people who are here and we are learning together, not in a way just to, know more information, instead to take what we learn here and put it to practice. For me, in Chicago. And in some ways, I do believe there's some people who will hear my words and respond differently. I trust that my perspectives are not going into a void. That somebody, perhaps a few people, will walk away and do things differently.
Okay. I think was that Charles asking the question? I want to get the attribution right in the notes.
Yep, Charles Brown. And there's another question.
Hey, this is Tom Schwartz. My side gig is being an advocate, unpaid, all that. How do I reach out to the underserved communities, right? How do I make that approach? Any suggestions?
I would challenge the premise of the question. It's not about reaching out. That doesn't work. What you're describing is engagement. It doesn't work. It doesn't work in our neighborhoods. What works is shifting power and resources to the people who are experiencing the problem at the hyperlocal level. And then they reach out to you. Not you reaching out to them. However, for them to be in a position to go and connect with the appropriate people or organizations or agencies, we need power and resources. Those who are the most impacted by inequities are the best positioned to execute strategies around equity. We should be creating our own solutions in our neighborhoods, not responding to your solutions for us. So what I would encourage you and others to really think about is, at a tactical level, how are you taking the power and resources you have and delivering that to Black and brown people at the neighborhood level?
Great. Oboi mentioned, how our partnership was really, I was listening. Oboi put out a call for work to support research, empirical research to support their advocacy, and by kind of sitting back and listening to who's out there, who's doing this work, and how can I contribute with it over here has led to a successful, sustained partnership.
I would say that one of the things that you said was, I want them to participate in the conversation, and they're likely having these conversations in their communities. So maybe it's that we need to participate in their conversation.
I have a question, given TRB is very international. I think a lot of the bike equity conversations are in context. Maybe what lessons can be learned from the US that can be brought to international context and vice versa? And are there any differences that we see with doing equity work maybe outside the US, and that may be opposed to the whole meeting at large? Maybe for me.
The question was around how TRB's equity work focuses primarily in the US context, and what are some ways that we can see that being effective, and we can take that for international use, but then also what are the international experiences that we can talk about here in the US context as well. If that can work. I know a lot of my work has really been US focused, so it's hard for me to speak much to international context. I think that the US has a very specific and particular approach to equity. I spent some time researching in England, and their approach is it's not at the same level as we are. Like, we're actually discussing and talking about racial equity. So I think that there's, ways that we can help move European work towards vocalizing and talking about racial equity. But then there are other places, South America in particular, that are doing this work, and we can learn a lot from them as well.
I think that connection to Latin America, to South America, is important because they're grappling with race in ways that are different to the way that we do here, but are also face many of the same challenges that we have. And I reviewed some research that kind of explored those intersections between race and social class in Mexico and Chile, and Colombia, and other countries there. And I think just making space for that here and highlighting that, inviting them through a virtual option to speak to a panel on there's one thing.
Yeah, me, Jesus, and Ken were talking about this last night. I am so tired and frustrated with the U.S. aspiring to European ideals around mobility and largely ignoring what's been the work being done in South American countries, because for Black and brown neighborhoods, the work being done in South America is more relevant to us, especially when you think about socialization, using mobility to reduce violence. These European cities, racially homogenous, some of them leaning socialist. The lack of severity around violence and poverty, those models do not translate to our neighborhoods. So I agree with the sentiment that we have to bring in other models like South America, perhaps some other models in other parts of the world, because I'm confident that those models will be more effective than the European model, which is largely how we think about bikes in this country.
do you deal with the reality that they oppose aggregating that?
I'm hearing it, the question was, there's different perspectives within the Black community. Classic status. There may be opposition to bicycling trip to these communities. So what is the response to that? Can I get that?
That's important because we don't want the assumption to be made when you speak of community that there is agreement within the community.
And this my mind first went to displacement and gentrification. So there's a perception, real perceived, that bringing in, well, I guess let's start with bringing in infrastructure is going to increase property values, is going to cause some gentrification. There's also the perception that will then displace folks, and without any support for people in place, and that is true. So I've been hinting to this earlier before. There's a connection between the transportation infrastructure, bicycling, and housing. And those are really difficult things to disentangle. So I think one of the things that I hear more frequently is, if we have more bicycle infrastructure, then is that for us, and how will that affect my ability to stay in this community that's now being served by this structure? So I think I don't think this is actually answering your question, sorry, Charles, but I do want to say that that is a concern, and that's one of the things that
I appreciate the question, Charles. First, we should acknowledge that part of the reason so many people in our neighborhoods don't support the activity of cycling is the failure of the transportation sector. They have failed to come into our neighborhoods and connect and have a conversation that moves us. They're coming into our neighborhoods in the way that they always work in every neighborhood. So there's no distinction around how they work in our neighborhoods, and that we're not inspired. So that's one. I'm not of the opinion that our lack of support for cycling has anything to do with us. It's about the failure of the sector that has contributed to that lack of support. And then two, any neighborhood, no matter the demographic, will have people that agree and disagree on an issue. There are no groups and no policy matter where there is consensus across the board. So why should we expect that to be the case in Black neighborhoods or Black and brown neighborhoods? And then our approach is not centered around going and fighting for infrastructure. That's not our priority. Our priority, number one, is creating an experience where people at the neighborhood level come and engage in the activity of cycling in a way that's safe, in a way that's social, in a way that's fun and exciting and learning. We call those community bicycle rides. They're part of our community mobility rituals. That's the first step. That's the first way that we connect with people at the neighborhood, is just to come on a ride. We're gonna have some music. We're gonna have some experts to talk about the neighborhood. Come and ride with us. And over time, they began to go through a little bit of a shift. They begin to enjoy the activity. They see it as a learning experience. They're engaging more in their neighborhoods. They're socializing with more people in their neighborhoods. And over time, perhaps one day, they'll be an advocate with us. And that's the approach, not this focus on infrastructure.
That one thing expected here. One of the things is we're sort of limited and hemmed in by the data that we have and the data that we use. So it's, and I'm listening to this too, but you know, when we're looking at patterns across the neighborhoods and people, you know, we're using categories of white, Black, Latino, Asian, other, essentially. But as you point out, Charles, within Black, there's, you know, Caribbean Black, there's immigrant Black, there's African American. Within Latino, it's, you know, there's, you know, all of South America and Latin America, right? So those differences don't come out and aren't often able to come out in some of the quantitative for your particular. Okay. So I saw a question.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this deep conversation. Rebecca, are you on?
Yeah. So thank you, everyone. I think we actually took more time than we intended, but it just shows the importance of this discussion and the richness. And I actually got cut off on my Twitter, so I got like the first 3/4 of the conversation that I'll tweet. And Oboi and Jesus and Stefanie, I'm tagging you, but I don't have your Twitter handle. You know, feel free to jump in and correct anything or add your context, additional context. I also hope this is a conversation that we continue, and I appreciate Charles's pointing out that that we absolutely don't want this to be extractive. We want this, Oboi, to your point, to be something that influences the way things move forward. And I hope that you'll remain involved with the Bike Committee because your perspective is invaluable. And I'm so grateful to Stefanie and Jesus for being here, and hope you all stay as well involved as well. And Charles is actually a member of the committee, and we are so grateful, Charles, for your questions as well. This is a big topic, and it's one that obviously there's so much work to do, but every day we can take a step forward. So if everyone could just join me in a round of applause for our speakers today. Thank you again. And we have been recording this session. We are going to attempt to have a transcription as well. And we'll make that available to folks afterward. And I just want to thank everyone also for being present with us today. This was a trial, and I think it went pretty well. And I'm really grateful for people being flexible and enthusiastic. And a huge thanks to Peter Kuntz, who is the reason that this meeting actually was able to happen in person, because I wasn't able to be there, and Peter stepping in like this is just really critical. So there are a couple of updates about conferences and job opportunities that I will include in the notes. So stay tuned for those. And I hope you guys have a great rest of the conference in person. And we'll look forward to crossing paths, you know, hopefully in person sometime soon, but if not, feel free to contact us, email me, and, you know, stay involved via mytrb.org. So thank you, everyone.